Hello. We would like to welcome you to the second panel of today's Schiller Institute conference entitled The Moral Collapse of the Transatlantic World Cries Out for a New Paradigm. The second panel, this afternoon's panel, is entitled The Method of the Coincidence of Opposites. Only a united worldwide health effort without sanctions can reverse a worldwide pandemic. It's our estimate that the world will never go back to the way it was before. There will be no return to normal. That is an impossibility. Rather, the world must go forward to something new and better. In this panel, we propose to speak about a method of thinking and action that will allow the world to do that. Now, if you were with us for our first panel, which was entitled The March of Folly, Can Mankind Still Extinguish the Now Lit Fuse of Thermonuclear War, you know something about the danger that we face. But in order, however, to ensure that those of you that may be viewing right now for the first time today also have a sense of this, we're going to play you the observations of two individuals concerning the question of the danger of war and how wars come on, and then what kind of decisions are made. The first is the co-founder of the Schiller Institute, the late economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche, and this is a brief excerpt from his 1999 Storm Over Asia. And then the second remark is from retired Rear Admiral Mark Pelaez, who spoke to us about the character of the decision to go to thermonuclear war.
If Russia is pushed to the wall, where it decides to disintegrate willfully or fight back, the likely thing is it will fight back. It will use the weapons it has. It does not have the weapons to win a war, but it has the weapons sufficient to impose a powerful, deadly deterrent on the nations behind the mercenary forces which are presently attacking it. There lies the danger. Unfortunately, most people in the United States are living under the delusion that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the combined military power of the United States and its British Commonwealth allies, including Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, countries that are really under the British Queen personally, as the United Kingdom is, believe that these forces, Anglo-American forces, are so powerful that they can ignore the United Nations Security Council and conduct wars on their own with impunity. Most Americans tend to believe that and believe they don't have to worry about foreign wars. They don't have to worry about terrible things happening in Africa or South America or Eurasia generally. It won't come here, just as many Americans said before Pearl Harbor about the war then ongoing in Europe. In reality, it can come here. I'm not predicting that it will. I'm saying the likelihood, the danger exists. And as long as the present policies of our government continue, especially the policies of the right-wing Stone Age faction inside the Congress, the right-wing policies of Vice President Al Gore and of Madeleine Albright, a Brzezinski associate, as long as these policies on the United States' part continue, the danger of war is growing. It's not immediate, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow. But wars come on like that. You get to a point of no return, there's still no war. Then somewhere down the line, maybe a couple of years later, the war actually breaks out. And war is breaking out all over the world now.
The military, the leadership in the military always wants to be prepared for whatever is necessary to defend our country and our interests, but we're not people that want war. War is a last resort. And when you ask me about nuclear submarines, for instance, I commanded an attack submarine, but I was executive officer on a ballistic missile submarine during the Cold War. And it was the philosophy of mutually assured destruction that, and the surety of it that kept us safe in some respects. But it was the worst nightmare if you ever had to do it. Would I have launched if I had to? Yes. Because without credibility, there is no, there is no deterrence, right? On the other hand, one nuclear submarine, that nuclear submarine with all its capability at the time could take out every major city east of the Mississippi in the US, one submarine. You also knew that if you ever did take those actions, there was nothing to come home to. So you had to be ready, you had to be credible, you never wanted to have to exercise it.
We cannot, as a human species, out of a lack of morality, allow this to occur. We must advise a new method to reverse this potential end of civilization. We refer to this method, which is not entirely new, as the method of the coincidence of opposites. To discuss this and begin this second panel, it's my honor to introduce to you the founder and chairman of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Yes, good evening, or good afternoon for some of you. Well, as we were discussing in the first panel, the world is on the edge of a potential war, and it is not so clear where is the solution, because there was also a very far-reaching discussion on why the United Nations is very important, because it has presently no replacement, but also that according to its present charter, you cannot really prevent one of the permanent five of the UN Security Council, to stop, policies which are right now to the detriment of of many countries, like the ones who are affected by the sanctions. So the question is what to do. How is there a solution? Are we as a human species condemned to again and again repeat the same mistake like World War I? We were sleepwalking into World War II, was a sort of logical consequence of the First World War, because it was not resolved by a peace order, because the Versailles Treaty was absolutely not one which could have worked. So are we condemned to walk into a third world war, which, by all knowledge we have about it and the nature of nuclear weapons, maybe nobody would survive and the human species would cease to exist? That's what several people have mentioned. Armageddon, a total catastrophe, end life as we know it on this planet. These formulations have been used in the recent period by many people. Well, the method of the empire, all empires, is divide and conquer, to create geopolitical conflict, to set one country against the other one, then manipulate them like on a chessboard. This is Brzezinski's great chess game, whole strategy for the defeat of Russia. So, is there another way than to insist on your interest against the interest of another one? Or is there a method of thinking how you can overcome a seemingly impossible situation? Now, we discussed a couple of times, in the Schiller conferences and elsewhere, the difference between Aristotle and Plato. Aristotle basically saying, if something is A, it cannot be B. And this contradiction is, unsurmountable. And Plato already, with his conception of the higher hypothesis, or the hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, showed a road to a conception how the human mind can leap onto a higher level and redefine solutions through a process of change. Now, Nicolaus of Cues, and that was the subject of one of the previous conferences, developed this method of the coincidence of opposites, which is the idea that the human mind, being with creativity, can define always for any problem a level of solution which is on a completely different plane, a higher plane than that on which the conflict arose, because the one is of a higher order than the many. That was also what Einstein was saying, that you never try to find a solution to a problem on the level where it arose. You have to find a new conception, a more powerful conception. Now, Cusanus, Nicolaus of Cusa, had this idea that harmony in the macrocosm can only exist if all microcosms develop, and it doesn't matter if this microcosm is a human being or a nation, but that the harmony can be accomplished by taking the maximum development of the other microcosm as your self-interest and vice versa. And that then the development of all of these microcosms are a process of perfection, where the more development you cause in the other microcosm, the more it echoes back on you, and vice versa. And this way, it is a process of development to higher levels. Now, a similar conception you find in Leibniz and his idea of the monads, which I don't want to go into here right now, but I want to mention a couple of words. How did Nicolaus of Cues arrive at this truly revolutionary method of thinking? And he was very conscious about it. He said, I'm now proposing a way of thinking which has never been thought by any human being before. And it is a completely new way how to approach things. Now, this whole idea came to Nicolaus basically on the ship travel from Byzantium, from Constantinople to Italy, on the way to the councils of Ferrara and Florence. And he said, all of a sudden, I had a complete, like a thought coming from above, from God, a divine inspiration. And then he developed this idea of the coincidence of opposites of thinking. And it is very obvious that that was something which influenced Cusanus's thinking throughout his whole life. Because a little bit later, when you had the fall of Constantinople, this was the final battle which decided the fate of the Byzantine Empire. And, it was quite a bloody battle. Mehmed II, young person, young ruler, had basically set his mind to conquer Constantinople. And he prepared it well. He built up a huge army of 150,000 people. He had a big flotilla. And he worked on that for about 2 years, where, the preparations were made. He had a whole elaborated system of, great building tunnels, of building, various flanks. And the basically the defender of Constantinople Constantine the 11th could not really mobilize the other Christian forces to come to help. So he had only, I think, something like 40,000 troops, but he was much in the defeatable situation. So then finally, I spare you all the very interesting aspects of how this occurred. Constantinople fell after fierce battles, and the Turks basically stormed into the city, and they were told that they could possess the city for 3 days, and everything they would plunder they would own afterwards forever. So naturally, people really behaved like, people behave in such circumstances. And it must have been quite brutal. A lot of blood flowed. A lot of people got killed. Many women were kidnapped and made into slaves. So it was an absolute disaster. And when the knowledge about that became known, this was a horror show. It was like an early clash of civilization between the Occidental Christianity and the Oriental Muslim world. And there were horror stories of what had happened. And it is under the impression of these absolutely unbelievable horror stories, people being killed and, thousands losing their lives, that Nicolaus of Cues applied this method of the coincidence of opposite. And he wrote one of the most beautiful dialogues about peace in faith, De Pace Fidei. And he basically says, look, after having heard all these horror stories about Constantinople, we have to find a way of resolving this. So he creates a Socratic dialogue whereby 17 representatives of different nations and religions go to God and they say, look, Logos, you have to help us because we all kill each other in your name. And, this cannot be your intention. So can you not give us an advice what to do? And then God talks to all of them, the Syrians and the Italians and the different religions. And he says, well, you all are representatives of a philosophy. You love truth because you are a philosopher in your own country and you are respected for that. They all say, yes, we are philosophers, absolutely. And then God says, yeah, and they say, but what do? We still fight each other. Can you help us? And God says, well, yes, as philosophers, you know that there is only one truth. And the mistake you make is that you mistake the one truth which comes from God with the many interpretations which were made by the prophets. So they say, yes, we can see that the truth of God must be a higher truth than the interpretation of the prophets. But this is not enough. Can you still help us? And then God says, well, yeah, and you make the other mistake that you mix up that one divine truth with tradition. Each of you have different traditions and they seem to contradict each other, but the truth is only one. So then they say, this makes all sense, but you cannot ask us that we go back to our people and tell them that they should follow a new religion when they spilled so much blood for the old one. And then God says, no, I'm not talking about a new religion. I'm talking about the one religion which is above religions. I'm talking about the religion which is before all religions. And then they agree with that, and they can see that there is one truth, one God, and one religion. So, by investigating this question many years ago, I said, well, does that make sense? Do you find a resemblance in the different religions about that concept? And I looked at various, philosophies like Confucianism, Hinduism, Christianity. And indeed, I did find that you have a principle in each of those which corresponds to this dialogue and this one truth. And that is the lawfulness of the universe, God's creation. Now, in Christianity, you call that natural law. In Confucianism, you call it cosmology or mandate of the heaven. And in Hinduism, you also talk about cosmology, but you call it Sanatana Dharma, this divine spark which is in all of us. So it seems to me that, if mankind is going to survive or not as a species, are we going to self-extinct or not? really depends entirely on this question if we can overcome this being victimized by the imperial thinking, the divide and conquer, and that we let ourselves be either in that camp hostile to the other camp, or can we somehow evoke in us and in others this quality of this inner self-development in cohesion with the lawfulness of the creation of the universe. Now, it seems to me that this is a method which absolutely must be applied now. I think that, the question of somehow overcoming this geopolitical confrontation, or, especially the divisions of identity policies, which is making the divisions more and more and more by the day, and that we have to somehow find this inner mechanism, this inner idea which makes us all human, belonging to the one human species. Now, it seems to me that given the pandemic and the fact that, we are really in an unbelievable crisis, a moral crisis, a political, medical, military crisis, economic crisis, financial crisis, that we have to start somewhere where we address this question of this, what makes us all human, and that is the sacredness of every human life on this planet. Now, I think that the key leverage to change the situation is to create a world health system, to create a modern health system in every single country, because without which we will not be able to defeat this pandemic, because new strains will develop in those countries which are not being helped, and they may undo all efforts we have done with the vaccinations in the countries who were more fortunate to apply them. So I think that this idea of starting to create a better world, I mean, really a better world, is to create a health system in every country, which naturally means sanctions have to go. We have to build a health system in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Haiti, in Mali, in Niger, in all countries. And I think that we will be able to do that, because I think human beings have the potential to be human, and that is what we are all about. So that is really what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Helga. We're going to have time to discuss all of this a little later, and I invite everybody to go to the questions at schillerinstitute.com for that purpose. Next, we have Dr. Joycelyn Elders, former Surgeon General of the United States and co-founder of the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And her topic is Join or Die, Why a World Health Platform Protects Each of Us.
Good afternoon. I'm particularly happy to address you today, both those of you who've been with us from the beginning last year, and those of you who may be joining us for the first time this morning. Greetings to Helga and all of you assembled around the world for this conference of the Schiller Institute. At the outset, I'm pleased to report that our committee has made some tangible progress in our efforts to bring together our sometimes divergent forces for what we call a coincidence of opposites. We've succeeded both in the United States and internationally in the initiation of our primary demonstration projects. And my job today is to say something about the context of these projects, which are only a beginning, but conclusively show what can be done. The theme of today's conference is the moral collapse of the transatlantic world cries out for a new paradigm. What is that moral collapse? It is a collapse of the standards of excellence, standards which demand of us more than we believe we can do, more than we believe we can sometimes give, and sometimes more than we believe we can endure. In a world of turmoil such as we now inhabit, excellence is not an option. Excellence is a necessity. We must be physically capable intellectually qualified, and emotionally committed to not giving up until the problem before us is solved, until the job is done. It is, however, of great concern to those of us that we have tried to live our lives according to these standards and have recommended these standards to all our nation should now relinquish its standards of excellence in favor of a comfortable, perhaps deadly mediocrity. Let me give you an example. We're talking about defeating a world in pandemic with a vaccine. What about water and food? It should be obvious to all of us that without clean water and nutrition, there is no health. It would be foolish for us to embark upon an effort to contain the pandemic if we did not simultaneously design how the problem of food and water has to be addressed in the poorest of nations on our planet. Over 2 billion people on the planet do not have access to clean water. 2.5 billion people experience some degree of food insecurity, including 41 million right here in the United States. David Beasley of the World Food Program said that more than 270 million people face potential death from famine this year. According to the World Bank and WHO, half the world lacks access to essential health services. 1.6 billion people lack adequate housing. An estimated 1.2 billion people do not have access to electricity. Whether or not people have access to electricity is a marker as to whether or not they have an essential tool to overcome sickness. How do you run a hospital, store essential medicine, or preserve adequate large quantities of food? Given this situation, it is a surprise that we have a COVID pandemic. Given the failure of many governments, especially in Europe and Americas, to respond rapidly, compassionately, and scientifically to this outbreak, it is a surprise that this pandemic is still not under control. And we're seeing alarming rates of spread planet-wide, including new variants from India to Brazil to San Francisco. I said at the outset of this pandemic that the world may always have disease. Indeed, we may always have epidemics, but there is no necessity to have a pandemic. A pandemic disease spread in the 21st century is a failure of morality, not of medicine. Indeed, this moral collapse is a manifest of an indifference to the misery and suffering of our fellow human beings around the world. It is not only immoral, but self-defeating, medically and otherwise, to simply accept these conditions. Clean water and food are basic rights for the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You won't be alive if you don't have food and water. You won't be free because you won't be allowed to be alive. And you certainly won't be happy. So if you believe in what we call the inalienable rights of the Declaration of Independence, then you have to believe that it is the inalienable right of everyone on the planet, especially the young who are not responsible for the conditions of their birth, to have clean water, food, and medicine. If not for their sake, for your own sake and that of our nation. Water, food, housing, and health are not privileges or luxuries. They are necessities for all of us and for each of us, because we see today we neglect these things for our fellow human beings at our own peril. They cannot be provided only for those who can afford them. That is the suicidal economics of indifference. None of us in our electronically interconnected world can afford that these necessities not be made available to everyone. That is the economics of self-sustaining compassion. Without provision of these fundamental necessities, there can be no effective defense of public health, which must be a planet-wide concern. This is the lesson of the pandemic. Unless we come to recognize this basic truth, we may all perish. As Helga and the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites have been stressing, we must create a world health platform. Every nation must have a modern health delivery system. This means not only hospitals and trained personnel, but infrastructures such as roads, bridges, transportation networks, electricity, and so forth. This can be done. We have the resources, but we must once again acquire the standards of moral excellence required to do what only seems impossible. Nations working together can get this done. The committee's pilot projects, community health workers in Washington, D.C., and our food and medical personnel project in Mozambique are demonstrating how an effort which unites people of diverse backgrounds and interests can get something accomplished. You will hear much more about that now and from other speakers who are directly involved in these projects. But again, I say, indifference, complacency, apathy are our enemy. They are the pandemic we must defeat. We need individuals of all ages, especially the young, to stand up and say, I'll do my part to correct these injustices. And to work from this day in whatever way I can to create a better world for all humanity. That is the standard of excellence that may be the minimal condition for our continued survival on this planet and our health as a one human race, which chooses unity over addiction, health over sickness, and life over death. We all must be involved. Every nation, every individual must be involved. We must listen to the cries of all of the nations, learn of their needs so we can lead them to the path of excellency. We must learn to live up to the standards, up to our standards of excellence. Love, unity, and understanding. This we must do if we want to have a healthier world that we can all be proud of and that we can all live in the way we want to live. Thank you for your understanding, your unity, and your involvement. And thank you for your help. And thank you for your involvement in this conference.
We want to thank Dr. Elders for her statement. She will be with us during the question and answer period to discuss further the committee. We're now going to hear from the United States from Dr. Khadijah Lang, Chairman of the National Medical Association, their Council on International Affairs. She's also the President of the Golden State Medical Association, and Marcia Baker, who is from the Editorial Board of the Executive Intelligence Review, and they have entitled their joint presentation, Report on the Mozambique Pilot Aid Project Toward World-Scale Mobilization.
Thank you for that introduction. I am Dr. Khadijah Lang, the president of Golden State Medical Association and the chair of National Medical Association's Council on International Affairs. Our organizations have been going to the East African country of Mozambique since 2017, providing medical missions in an effort to mitigate the healthcare disparities that are abundant and overwhelming in that country and in many other parts of the world there. We started out by bringing medical supplies and delivering them to a government hospital for the poor outside of the capital city, and subsequently came on missions bringing physicians to do surgeries and operate on patients that would not have been able to be treated in their country prior to our coming. We focused with our medical missions on professional development to train the physicians that were going to be staying there and working when we were gone, and thus make a more sustainable mission with what little time we had to be able to donate and go over there and work. We also partnered with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and were able to provide shoes, eyeglasses, and clothing for people in that country. The eyeglasses that we brought were over 400 pairs of prescription eyeglasses, and through another affiliation and partnership with the Lions Club International and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, we were able to turn the glasses over to an ophthalmologist from the Lions Club in Mozambique, who was then able to distribute those glasses to the appropriate patients based on what their eye strengths or weaknesses were, so that the glasses were fully used. These are the types of things that collaboration can bring about. It's important, if you want to protect people's feet, that they can have shoes to walk in. It's important that they can see where are the pit holes to avoid falling in and getting injured, and therefore they need vision. And it's important that the physicians there learn how to do more complex surgeries. And these are the types of things that we have focused on with our missions over the last few years to Mozambique. Unfortunately, due to certain changes in the climate and the environment, when we started out, the main need that we were attempting to address was healthcare disparities and inequities. Over the years, we have watched as locust plagues have come through and devastated the crops, creating famine in multiple areas of the country. And unfortunately, those locust plagues were followed up by cyclones, some of the worst cyclones they've seen in recorded history there, that came through and flooded, just inundated entire villages due to the devastation that had already been done by the locust plagues preceding that. This creates a situation that increases illnesses, increases malaria, increases cholera, and these diseases, on top of people that are famished and near starvation, only create a pandemic of a size that one cannot imagine. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough, and COVID came along. The COVID brought a different type of problem to the country, and not only did it bring more financial and economical devastation because of the need to lock everything down, it caused it to be more difficult for people to be able to get out and get food. Because if you have a lockdown, there's no way to get food. So all of these different events, one on top of the other, have made life in Mozambique extremely difficult. And this is something that as a group, we can do a big deal to change. There is an African proverb that says, if you want to go somewhere quickly, go alone, that if you want to go far, go in a group. This is why Golden State has joined with Schiller's Institute in the coincidence of opposites, because together with all of us pitching in, we bring more to the table. While we will continue as a medical organization to try to improve the medical and healthcare conditions for people there and bring medical supplies there, if we medically treat a person that is starving, we're not going to have much of a result. By partnering with our friends, the farmers, by bringing agricultural information and assistance to these areas that have been so devastated, and then bringing food through the assistance of the farmers so that we can feed the people there, we're going to have a much greater impact, and we can show the world what can be done when people come together and work together for the cause of humanity.
Thank you, Dr. Lang. And I'm very glad of the opportunity to work with you and the many others on the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites on this combined project involving agriculture, medicine, water, seeds for the future. But what I'll address is, how do we scale up to the large scale response we need in Africa and around the world with this pandemic and the famine combined? Now, the map shows the location of the worst off of some 270 million people in the world that do not have sufficient food. And this focuses on about 40 countries. And in those countries, there's over 140 million people who are in extreme need of food to the point of famine. So one can see in Africa, where Mozambique is in southern Africa, you have 43 million people in this situation. East Africa, 28 million. West Africa and the Sahel, another 20-some million. And then look at Southwest Asia, where you have over 20-some million, with the situation in Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan. And in the Americas, you have 13 million. So altogether, it has been said that the danger, if we don't have large-scale response with relief and food, 34 million people could die in the coming months ahead. Now, look at the farmer side of this situation. In the picture in your own mind, the world's most productive, high-yield farming areas in the United States and France and Germany, from Canada down to Australia, Argentina, farmers are being squeezed to the point independent family farmers are going out of operation altogether. So they are, there's been low prices, even if they're high now, and there's been other kinds of acute problems of dictates of how they should farm. So what are we left with? We're left with billionaire overlords like Bill Gates in the United States is the biggest farmland owner in the country. Now, we have a graph that just typifies the decline in numbers of farmers. In this case, it shows the decline in numbers of cattle ranchers in the United States over the 30 years from 1980 to about 2012. So we went from over 1.5 million down to maybe 700,000 or less. And it's the same with dairy farmers, and it's the same in other parts of the world. So what can we do? And Dr. Lang described this joint effort in this spirit in Mozambique. And so what we have to do is mobilize food relief wherever we can to keep people alive and end the malnutrition. Secondly, we need to prevent any more losses of farm production output. And we have tried and true measures. We should have floor prices, you could call them parity prices under what farmers produce. We should look forward to expanding production. The world needs it. Backing young farmers to get started. ending the domination by a few transnationals internationally that control food and have enforced underdevelopment in Africa. And third, we need infrastructure like crazy to for the water and the power and the hospitals and the research and transportation. So this is what we need. But I have to stress what is standing in the way. You see here in a new document that was released in the last week in Brussels by the European Commission that says we should have carbon farming, not food farming. Now, this is really crazy. It's part of a green agenda that says farmers should cut back on their inputs. They should use 30% less land by 2030 for anything having to do with human needs, minerals or food. They should use less fertilizer. When it comes to carbon farming, that's a crazy thing. What it means is the farmers gets an offer to get a few bucks by selling what's called carbon credits from CO2 captured in his soil, so that big name Wall Street companies could then speculate on it and create a green bubble. It sounds like science fiction, and it is crazy. So this calls for producing less food in the world when we need more. So this kind of thing has to stop. So when we act for emergency relief measures, what we're doing, like in Mozambique or elsewhere, is creating the momentum for development, for the infrastructure, for the technology that we need to change the situation. Now, if you look at Mozambique and Southern Africa, look at the opportunity. There are famous rivers that go through Mozambique to the ocean there, the Zambezi, the Limpopo, and others you may not have heard of. We need a Tennessee Valley approach, TVA authority approach, to develop that. Same with the cyclones and hurricanes that Dr. Lang, you talked about, because the coast of Mozambique is beautiful, but it's defenseless. We engineers know how to put in sea gates and levees and the other things that we haven't done. So the point is, when we scale up our morality to work together and to figure out how to produce more, get it to where it's needed, then we can mobilize to meet all the needs between now and the future. And I think this is a special call to youth, and this is the meaning of the Mozambique Initiative.
Thank you, Khadijah and Dr. Lang and Marcia. Before we go to our next speaker, I want to read one of the greetings that we've received for today's conference, and this one is from former Mayor and Ambassador Ray Flynn of Boston. He spoke at our Schiller Institute Mozart Requiem concert some 7 years ago, back in 2014, when we did a concert for the 50th anniversary of the death of JFK. And he'd been in touch with our organization and one of our members, now deceased, Nina Ogden, together with whom they'd been in touch with various people from Justitia et Pax and Missionaries of Charity, Mother Teresa, and so on, and done some social justice projects. So he wrote this directly to Nina's son, Matthew, but it was written for our conference today. And he says, Matthew, it is with appreciation and respect that I acknowledge the wonderful and kind work that your mother and dedicated people along with her did over the years to serve God and our country. I'm glad the job of helping others less fortunate proudly continues. Stay safe and healthy. We need you. My best to all. God bless. Ray Flynn, former mayor of Boston and U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. We're now going to hear from Luis Vasquez of Peru from the Schiller Institute there. And his topic is, do not forget, the global concentration camp oven is now nuclear.
Soy Luis Vázquez, un seguidor de LaRouche por más de 45 años.
I'm Luis Vasquez, a follower of Lyndon LaRouche for over 45 years. I live in Peru, and I would like to thank the Schiller Institute for having invited me to say some things which are very important for understanding the current situation. And you will forgive me for beginning by talking about my case, because it is relevant to uncovering a reality which not everyone sees. In fact, it wasn't even clear to me, let alone for the world population.
La realidad es que yo estoy metido en un campo de concentración.
The reality is that I find myself in a concentration camp. A concentration camp which is not limited to Peru, but is global. And I will explain this to you. 6 weeks ago, my wife and I came down with COVID in a country like Peru, which holds a world record of cases per million inhabitants, where, because of neoliberal economic policies, of that savage capitalism which only conceives of profit in the form of money, the economy has been destroyed, and therefore there are no services, not education, not transportation, and there are no health services. And in that situation, for people like us who are of a certain age, getting sick with COVID means pretty much a death sentence. I got sick, we got sick, and we went to a private hospital to request ICU beds where we could get oxygen. There weren't any ICU beds available in all of Lima. Every ICU bed had a waiting list of 200 or 300 people. There just weren't any. We had to set up ICU beds in our house. With the help of our family, thanks to my children, they were able to do all the logistical work needed to keep us alive with oxygen during those terrible weeks of having severe COVID-19 pneumonia, which is what we had.
Indudablemente, como ustedes comprenderán, no toda la población puede hacer eso.
As you will understand, clearly not everyone can do that. I'm showing you a picture for you to see how people wait online to fill their oxygen cylinders in order to save their relatives. A cylinder now costs $1,000. Refilling them with 10 cubic meters of oxygen costs $200. Not everyone can pay that. Not even a tiny percentage of the population can do it. The rest die. This is a Holocaust, and we have to understand it from a scientific standpoint and the moral standpoint we're living through.
Porque lo que está pasando en Perú y lo que está pasando en la India, en Brasil.
Because what is happening in Peru and what is happening in India, in Brazil, what is happening in Yemen, in Syria, etc., etc., there are a number of etceteras which are only the places where extremes have been reached.
De este campo de concentración global.
They're the places where you have the ovens of the global concentration camp. And if you don't think this is global, you are mistaken. And precisely because of that mistake, we may perish as a species.
Hay una situación.
The fact is that we have a situation which doesn't only involve one region. It involves the whole world social system in general, the whole political power system. because we have reached this situation precisely because wrong decisions were made, driven by usury from 1970 forward, which has destroyed all the processes which, with all of their faults, were leading to some results in terms of development on a world scale. Now, the world economy, as you know, is a casino at the edge of bankruptcy. It not only doesn't allow for health solutions, as we have seen, but it is unfortunately going to mean the beginning of a situation where the horsemen of the apocalypse are unleashed. War, following the plague, the famine, which is coming, will ultimately mean the triumph of death.
Se están produciendo cepas nuevas. A mí me agarró la cepa brasileña.
New strains are being produced. I was hit by the Brazilian strain, very deadly, with a very high fatality rate and very contagious, far greater than the first variant. And new strains are coming. It's likely that new variants, new mutations, new strains will appear, including regionally. And that's why we have to fix the decentralized vaccine R&D system. Here in South America, for example, we have to have a research center for new vaccines that will attack the strains that may appear in this area. The same holds for India and everywhere. This is going to mean real scientific transfers if we are to save the population.
¿Para qué vamos a hacer eso? Es decir, ¿para qué tenemos que pelear de esa forma?
But why should we do that? Why should we fight that way? This is not a matter that is merely in our interest, of the poor countries, the poor Africans who are dying, the Indians, and so on.
Es también el interés de los países ricos.
It is also in the interest of the rich countries, of the populations that don't believe that they are in the concentration camp. Because, as LaRouche has rightly said, if we take the biosphere and we add to that what he called the noosphere, which is the domain of human presence, it is one. With modern transportation routes, there are new forms of transporting goods and people. This process has accelerated. There are no barriers. The world is one.
No, el mundo es uno solo. Y la guerra, como el campo de concentración es global también.
And since the concentration camp is global, the war also must be global. If the US or Europe want to stop the third or the fourth strain that will come out of India, the new strain that will be more virulent and deadly, they have to wage the battle in India. They have to come here to Latin America to wage the fight, because that new strain is going to kill people in the United States.
O sea, la cuestión de la moralidad, la cuestión de compadecernos por todo ser humano, sea su color.
The issue of morality, the issue of sharing the suffering of every human being, whatever his color, is not only a moral matter, or the idea, shall we say, of, okay, that's good, maybe we will get to heaven, or things of that sort. That too, certainly. But fundamentally is a matter of science. It is scientifically true.
Los Estados Unidos, Europa, los países avanzados tienen que entender.
The U.S., Europe, and the advanced countries have to understand that the war must be won in the countries of the periphery. They have to defeat this plague in India, in South America, in Brazil, in Peru, and everywhere, if they wish to defend themselves.
Thank you, Luis. Going back to America now, we have a report from Dr. Walter Faggett, former Chief Medical Officer of the Washington, D.C. Department of Health and co-chair of the D.C. Ward 8 Health Council, and Ms.Genita Finley, who's a second-year medical student, and she is the designer of something called the Mississippi Delta Medical Extension School Program. This refers to a project that she has initiated in the state of Mississippi.
Hello, it is such a pleasure to be with Helga and Dr. Elders again as we talk about some of these world issues that Schiller is addressing. Again, I'm Walt Faggett, pediatrician here, assistant professor of family medicine at Howard University College of Medicine. Also, I'm co-chair of Ward 8 Health Council, as well as chair of a task force appointed by Councilmember White to attack the pandemic here in DC. And so privileged to be working with Lynn and Dennis and Helga on the project addressing many issues, mainly the pandemic, worldwide famine, and associated issues. We're very pleased to report that the pilot program here in DC is proceeding, trying to implement the vision as articulated by both Helga and Surgeon General Joycelyn Elders. That is to have a community health worker program here in DC, which can demonstrate some impact on increasing immunization, decreasing deaths from the pandemic here in Washington. If I might have a point of personal privilege, I'd like to ask if we could take a moment to moment of prayer for Mayor Bowser here in Muriel Bowser lost her sister from COVID pneumonia yesterday. We here in DC are mourning with our mayor, and it just emphasizes how important the work that Schiller Institute is doing worldwide. And we are so pleased and privileged to have a part in demonstrating some projects which might decrease the number of deaths. But thank you for that moment. But the pilot project is proceeding very well. We again had a mass immunization effort. I think we have some pictures. This was in Ward 8 Southeast Tennis Center, at which we had Howard University, Georgetown, and GW collaborating. We had students from those institutions, majority from Howard University. These are medical students, social work students, and pharmacy students. And we'll show you those slides at this time. Again, this was a result of the collaborative efforts of Ward 8 Health Council and the Councilmember Trayon White's task force on pandemic relief. We do have a data committee, which has confirmed that with the combined efforts of so many people, John Hopkins, the MCOs here in the city, just 60 organizations in Ward 8 Health Councils helping out. And so we initially had a 2.5% immunization rate in Ward 8. As of last week, it's up close to 10%. Unfortunately, Ward 8 is still the lowest in the city, with some wards having up to 20% immunization. And we still have the most deaths in Ward 8 at 203. No, I'm sorry, 204 now. In fact, the mayor's sister is the 104th, 204th death here. But we have had a couple of days of 0 deaths in DC. We're very proud to report. But that's just, we do have the vaccine hesitancy issue, which we're addressing. And we hope that the pilot program in which we've already identified volunteers who will be the initial ones trained as community health workers, Prestige Community Resource under the direction of Wilhelm Bonnet and John Smith will be coordinating this effort. We have some help now from a new organization, Empower DC, in which there'll be some returning citizens, 18 to 24 years of age, recruited to assist in this effort. And we're recommending that now that vaccine is available 16 and above on a walk-in basis, it would appear that our efforts need to be geared towards the vaccine hesitant and skeptics so that we get more shots in the arm in that population. And we are identifying some health workers who have been resistant, and we will make a special effort to turn that around. I've forwarded a draft of the proposal that Dr. Lawson and will have put together, and we look forward to working with Schiller Institute on fleshing that out. The students, we mentioned a student population that we have previously worked with from Ballou High School, and we plan to make experience available during the summer for any students who want to work with the community health worker training program. I just want to mention here that the Washington Post today, 4th of May, front page talks about how some of the youth here in some of the Indian American young professionals are helping their relatives in India. And this is something we will try to link in with as well. And there's Neil Makahija, who's the executive director, also Sudith Kaushik, who's a Harvard physician. So we will try to see if we can get some connectivity with them and see, again, I know Schiller is talking about what can we do to replicate what we do here in other countries. So India might be a good target for us as we go forward. So the exciting thing about the project here in DC, that we've been joined by a native of Mississippi, Ms.Genita Finley, second-year medical student at Georgetown, who's taken some time to work with us. And the pipeline program that she helped develop in the Mississippi Delta, we think might bring added value to our efforts here in Washington. It fits well with Howard University and GW and Georgetown resources. So at this time, I'm so pleased to present the newest member of our team, Ms.Genita Finley from Mississippi Delta. Genita?
Thank you, Dr. Faggett, for that introduction. Just to tell our people who are listening a little bit more about the Mississippi Delta, because oftentimes we hear about it, but we don't actually know that much about it. To give some context to where this program is located in. So the Mississippi Delta is overflowing with culture, traditions, and all sorts of historical landmarks and music in particular, right? That is some of the positive things that are known about the Mississippi Delta worldwide. But in addition to those positive things, and in addition to that amazing soul food that you get there, and in addition to the culture of horseback riding and fishing and hunting and all of that, there's also simultaneously huge, actually not just huge, but one of the greatest concentrations of rural persistent poverty in the country. In fact, in 2009, utilizing the census data, the federal government defined the term persistent poverty as a county in which 20% or more of its population has lived or currently lives in poverty in the past 30 years. Interestingly enough, the Mississippi Delta, the counties within it, all qualify for this. Suffering from one of the highest poverty rates ranging from 9% to 48% within the Mississippi Delta, averaging 33%. The Mississippi Delta residents are often restricted by high employment, food insecurity, low educational attainment, chronic illnesses, limited access to affordable health care, or even just access to food, leading to food insecurity. Mississippi as a whole has some of the lowest health rankings, and even more so, the Mississippi Delta actually has the lowest health rankings in the state. And there we battle poor health status, meager healthcare access, and inadequate primary care and preventive services. The rural nature of the Mississippi Delta just adds to these additional barriers of educational opportunities because we can't access them that would normally counteract this long-term poverty that we see there. So while I am from the Mississippi Delta, I'm also aware of the challenges that people live in, the challenges that people live in the Delta have to face and overcome daily to be successful. One of the things that I've always been adamant about doing is adding something back to my community that could better the community. Speaking with a bunch of the different officials in the Delta, I would always ask, like, what is a field, a career field that students could go into that could actually lift themselves out of this and help their future generations? And doing some research with the actual officials in Mississippi and also the Mississippi Delta on a whole, we found out that healthcare is the #1 growing field in the Mississippi Delta. Unfortunately, a lot of the students in Mississippi Delta are not prepared to enter that, whether it's criminal activity early on that might hinder their access to entering a healthcare pipeline program or an educational program, or whether it's just poor grades early on, or even just something as simple as just disinterest or thinking that I can't do it. I don't identify with people that look like that, so I can't do it. Not having mentors to push you and motivate you that you can do this. So that's when I came up with the idea of medical ascension. Medical ascension is actually a collaboration of not just me, but different people who actually work in healthcare, such as occupational therapists, paramedics, physicians, surgeons, even firemen are involved in this collaborative effort. And what it is the healthcare pipeline developmental program that takes kids 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. And I was intentionally chosen those grades because a lot of research is showing that by the grade of 10th grade, students have already given up on learning math and science just because of the repeated rhetoric, oh, you're not going to be good at math and science, or just peer pressure by that point has taken a foot in their mind so they don't pursue math and science. So we're trying to catch them before they can get to that age bracket. So the program targets 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, where there are 2 different components. One component is the Summer Medical Institute, where students will have 2-week cycles where they're actually educated on medical terminology, as well as different healthcare science fields knowledge bases, such as anatomy and infectious disease and nutrition. And they cycle through those 2 weeks, and they also learn CPR during those 2 weeks and get actual certifications so they can go home and brag to their family, like, hey, I've got this CPR certifications that would encourage them to continue their journey to pursue healthcare fields. And that's what happens during the Summer Medical Institutes through those 2-week cycles. Now, you might be asking what happens during the year. Well, one thing that we found out talking to a lot of just people in healthcare, well, it's a great idea to have a Summer Medical Institute for young kids, but what if their grades aren't good, right? What if they have all this exposure and they feel like, hey, this is something that I identify with, this is something I want to do, but their grades aren't good. So they're not going to be able to go to college, which is often the first step, or even complete high school, which is even a more premature first step to get into these fields. What are you going to do about that? And so that's when we added the second component, working with everyone, which is called Level Up. Level Up is an after school component where it's for 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. Those same 7th, 8th, and 9th graders that participated in the 2-week cycle Summer Medical Institutes will now have the opportunity to participate in an after-day school program that occurs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and where they will boost their math and science as well as history, because we want to make sure they can pass their state tests. And in Mississippi, you have to pass the history exam as well. So they'll boost their math and science and history knowledge base using actual proven programs and proven after-school curriculums, such as First in Math, which is a curriculum that a lot of people use in other states. I think New Jersey just had a huge blast of it in their state. And just to improve their math scores, their science scores, and their English scores as well, but mainly math, science, and history. And on the weekends, you might say, well, what's their motivation to do that? You know, they've already done the Summer Medical Institute. They've already gotten the exposure. Like, they're not going to want to come every day after school, where there is an attendance policy that's built into the program. As long as they attend so many sessions, they can participate in what we call Saturday clinical workshop sessions. And that's where we have different people of different healthcare fields come in and expose the students to different activities, such as we will have OB-GYN coming in and exposing them to suturing. We will have paramedics exposing them to basic life support. We will have doctors exposing them to heart auscultations and exposing them ophthalmoscopes, looking in someone's eyes, lung auscultations, things of that nature. And the goal is to really, number one, demystify this idea of you cannot become a healthcare professional. We want to demystify that and allow them to feel, no, I can become it and I identify with it, because the majority of the Mississippi Delta is also a minority, which is African American. And so the majority of our people that we have coming in to help are also minority, because we want the students to identify with the people that are like with the physicians, with the surgeons, with the occupational therapists, the physical therapists, with the nurse practitioners. We want them to see themselves in there. So that's one of the goals, is to make sure they feel like they can do this and they have the tools to keep moving forward in this field. And the second goal is to help them improve their grades, because without good grades, they can't get into the first door, which is, you know, just finishing high school, getting into college, and then doing what's next. So that's medical extension.
Apparently, there's been a problem with the video. Is that the case? What we can do is temporarily. That's the end of it. Okay, fine. So I want to do this. We have additional messages we've been receiving, and we want to go to a message that we received from Yemen. This message comes to us from Fuad Al-Jafari, president of the Yemeni BRICS Youth Summit. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And we're going to try to read as much of the entire statement as we can. And it's directed to the chairman of the International Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. I speak to you from Sana'a, the capital of steadfastness. I speak to you as we have passed the 7th year of resistance to the Anglo-Saudi American Emirati aggression against Yemen, and I remember with reverence the first statement issued by you on March 26, 2015, in which you condemned the aggression, and you quoted my saying that the goal of the aggression is to cut Yemen's access to the new Silk Road. Allow me to bring to you this statement, which is written under the impact of dozens of missiles falling on our city and our country daily. Added to that is the siege which is imposed on us, the occupation of southern Yemen by foreign powers, and the planting of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the depth of Yemen. We also consider the U.S. Senate's announcement of the Strategic Competition Act targeting the New Silk Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative, as the biggest threat to the international law of the United Nations, and an attempt to divide the world into superior and inferior sections, as was described by the great Dr. Shaban. For all of the above, I share with you, your guests in the world, the following 3 points. First, the peace that we seek for Yemen is comprehensive peace, that is economic freedom in controlling our currency and credits, our right to development within our borders, and coexistence with our surroundings in the world. So we do not want to limit any talks about Yemen to the question of famine and immediate health crisis, nor limit any conversation to the ongoing battles. Rather, any talking about peace must start by stopping the aggression, lifting the siege, stopping Western financing of the aggression, meaning ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Yemen, the complete departure of foreign forces, and withdrawing the occupation forces from our southern province and our islands, especially Socotra. Therefore, from this stage, we call for the inclusion of the Belt and Road Initiative in a new UN Security Council resolution to address the Yemeni Western conflict. We note here, too, that in our defense and striking deep inside Saudi Arabia, that the Yemeni military power is developing, but also that the army will have a role in the reconstruction process. We also want to arm ourselves with the philosophy of national credit, the policy of President Abraham Lincoln, and before him, the founding father, Alexander Hamilton, so that we leave no one behind. Secondly, with regards to the humanitarian situation, it is more tragic and worse than what is being reported in the news. Imagine that funerals never stop now due to the deaths as a result of the coronavirus. Those who did not die by the impact of a missile die of corona, and the conspiracy now is the slow killing of the Yemeni people by cutting all access to food and medicine in the entirety of our territories, also by denying us the development opportunities of joining the new Silk Road. Third, we value highly what the LaRouche Youth Organization has offered to the youth of the world in terms of the knowledge of economics, culture, and the true nature of mankind. It is our good fortune in the BRICS Youth Parliament in Yemen that we have been learning that metric of progress as developed by the economist, the immortal Lyndon LaRouche. In conclusion, we would like to express also our heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who, by the way, was the defense attorney for Lyndon LaRouche in his case, who will forever be remembered in Yemen and the Arab world. Thank you for your intellectual and moral solidarity with Yemen. Fuad al-Jafari, President of the Yemeni BRICS Youth Parliament. So that's that statement. We also have a statement which comes to us as a short greeting, again, from Augustinus Berkhout, who is the Professor Emeritus of Geophysics at Delft University of Technology, a member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences as well. So we're going to now play his greetings for this conference.
My name is Guus Berkhout. I am Professor Emeritus of Geophysics at the Technical University of Delft. And I want to thank Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche for organizing this Schiller Institute conference on avoiding World War III and inviting me to participate. I'm the founder of the Int'l group, now almost 1,000 scientists, who deny the imminent climate catastrophe. And as we explained in our World Climate Declaration, CO2 is not a pollutant. On the contrary, it is essential to all life on Earth. Int'l is dedicated to truth in science and education. Only then can we advance our knowledge to increase productivity with the goal to realize prosperity for all. Int'l, we are fighting against the influential Great Reset ideology. In particular, we fight against their dishonest narrative that is planting fear and guilt in the mind of people. Decades of shrewd brainwashing has made citizens pessimistic and submissive. Ladies and gentlemen, consistently planting fear and guilt. What a miserable ideology. Unfortunately, we see that scary citizens all over the world are now ready to hastily destroy their own energy system. But abrupt destruction of a reliable and cost-efficient energy system certainly means destruction of productivity. And destruction of productivity certainly means increasing poverty. Hence, under the pretense of saving our planet, you see, our society is destroyed. Meaning going back to the Dark Ages. Is that not a perverse goal? Int'l sees through the misleading Great Reset narrative and reveals to the public the mass waste of capital and talent involved. Above all, we have a hopeful message for the future, in particular for the young generation. We try to inspire them by telling that with reliable and affordable energy, we can improve the quality of life for everybody on our planet. Look, we got to the moon with hydrocarbons. I tell you, we will get to Mars with nuclear power. Today, my advice to our kids is, let the Great Reset elites not ruin your future. Please change fear into courage. Change decline into progress. And above all, change submission into innovation. I wish you all a great conference.
And let me now just announce, if you have questions for us, questions@schillerinstitute.org. And we will be getting to our question and answer section in just a few minutes. We have now a section that we're going to do from Germany. This is from the farm sector in Germany. And then later on in the questions and answers, we will be deliberating among farmers and clergymen and military and, of course, doctors about the entirety of what you're hearing here today. So what we want to do is go to Mr. Alf Schmidt, an independent farmer from Germany, and he is speaking on German farm protest leaders, Green Deal cuts farmers, food, and people.
What is the reason for the demonstration? Yes, hello. The plant protection action package must be revised. We here in Bavaria have been conducting insect control very well for decades and have many pioneer programs for flower strips, meadows, and so on. And it is voluntary and works well.
Und das Ganze ist auf freiwilliger Basis gestellt. Durch das Aktionspaket Insektenschutz will man in die FFH-Gebiete, Vogelschutzgebiete.
The new law will designate areas and ban plant protection products and fertilizers, which in our opinion amounts to expropriation, because the management we do, which is needed, will no longer be possible.
Kommt unserer Meinung nach einer Enteignung, klar, weil eine Bewirtschaftung in der Form, wie es nötig ist, nicht mehr möglich.
Die Politik der Bundesregierung ist ja Teil der EU-Politik und dort haben wir es ja.
The German federal government policy is part of the EU Green Deal and Farm to Fork program. A US Department of Agriculture study shows that if it is implemented, there will be less food production in Europe. Producer prices will fall and consumers will have to pay more.
Erzeugerpreise sinken, aber auf der anderen Seite eben die Verbraucher mehr für Nahrungsmittel bezahlen müssen.
What do you say?
The Green Deal is natürlich wieder
The Green Deal is, of course, a huge cut in agricultural production. It provides for 30% of the agricultural land across Europe to be returned to nature. The same applies to the seas that affect Europe. Pesticide use is to be restricted by 50% by 2030 and fertilizers by 20%. For Germany and the EU, the whole package means that food production will be severely restricted and reduced, so that Europe and Germany will have to import food on a very large scale in the future. If you outsource food production from Europe, that means that trade and the big cartel food companies are all the more important. Yes, trade is a problem because it is subject to the free market economy. It has happened in Germany in particular in the past that the big four, Rewe, Lidl, Aldi, Edeka, dominate 85% of the food market, retail plus processing, and this naturally leads to a strong concentration in the food trade. We also believe that they also determine food prices. We are just the lowest link. There's nothing left for us as it is at the moment. Don't you think that parity prices would be better and cheaper than the current EU subsidy system for farmers? This has been the policy once upon a time by the EU's predecessor, the European Economic Community, EEC. This is a basic requirement of ours, that we need cost-covering prices again. Under the subsidy policy, the big trading companies really get it, because they calculate what the farmer has to get, so that the farmer can grow bread, wheat or beets, and the companies can dominate.
Mein persönlicher Wunsch, und ich glaube, da spreche ich ja für viele Landwirte, wäre natürlich, dass wir von dieser
I speak for many farmers in saying that we would move away from this subsidy policy and that we once again can generate our income from the products that we produce and thus respond quickly to society's demands and needs.
I'm the organizer of this farmers demonstration. We have been demonstrating here since January 26. We have already held out here at minus 15 degrees. We are farmers of all branches. I myself am an independent free farmer. I do not belong to any association or any club. That is the advantage of this demonstration. No farmer has to place himself under any flag. Every association, be it vegetable farmers, fruit farmers, arable farmers, etc., from all kind of different associations, are all equal partners in this demonstration. What are the demands of the farmers who are demonstrating here, who also demonstrated already yesterday at the Brandenburg Gate? We have several demands. One of our demands is why we actually get started here, are fair market prices for the farmers. Farmers do get some subsidies, which everyone gets upset about and says you are getting a lot of money from the state, but these subsidies are actually used to support the products. I'm a sheep farmer, for example. When I deliver a lamb, I get 2.6 euros per kilo, but the lamb costs me 5.74 euros per kilo. These are my full costs. That means the rest is supported by the state, so that food prices are not pushed too high. But the government support is not enough, and we actually don't want them. We want to get decent wages for our normal work. This is called partial expropriation. The partial expropriation affects 1.4 million hectares in Germany. This partial expropriation concerns an area on which I can supply 5.4 million people with food. There are some things we fight for as BÜSO, which is not wanted either. The first step would be to have immediate parity prices. That is, price increases that have the goal of guaranteeing the farmer that he can farm. The second step would be national emergency programs for family farmers and farmers in need. I'm with you on that. The third is to double food production worldwide, which means we need twice as much food. According to the World Food Programme, an incredible 207 million people are at risk of hunger this year. That does not help if some people say the rich ones should give something to the poor ones, but these things must be produced. Only then you can give something away. And we take the production areas out of production under senseless pretext. I also had bees until 2 years ago, but then I also stopped because of Save the Bees. The beekeepers, old men over 50 years like me, were told that if you want to keep bees, You now have to get certified. You have to attend seminars to have proof that you can keep bees. Yeah, what have people been doing for 50 years? We were supposed to have some idiot from some government office explain to us how it works. The end of the story was, we said we are going home and are burning our hives. Many people quit the job. I quit too, and that is save the bees. You confronted the CDU deputy on stage yesterday. If you don't support us now, no, I said, if you let our farms go bust, we will make you unemployed. This sentence has gone through all of Germany. People have written to me from all corners. I've read it 100 times tonight. Everyone answered me. I said, yes, I did that. I said that. I also find it remarkable that you want to get personally involved in the election campaign. Yes, I'm all in, and it has already worked in the Bundestag. I announced it on February 10th when the Insect Protection Act was introduced. I announced it from the stage down here. We have now printed thousands of posters, which are already hanging out in Schleswig-Holstein. They have been a bit faster than others. The printers were a bit quicker. They hang on every street, on every trailer. They hang on the straw dolls. On the posters, we explained what everything you needed. We are now intervening in the party's election campaign, because if they destroy...
Yeah, so let me simply clarify what we've just seen. The first farmer we saw, farm leader we saw, was Rainer Seidl. And he is with Land Creates Connection. That's the first thing we saw. And that was from a rally going on in Munich from February. The second individual was Alf Schmidt, independent farmer. And that was an interview done with him in Berlin. And that was in March. So just to be clear, but I think what is certainly being clear when you look at that is that the crisis we're talking about, whether we're talking about food production or famine, whether we're talking about the lack of vaccines or other capabilities, medical capabilities being made available in certain countries or not. It's a global crisis and requires a global solution. We're now going to hear from Pastor Robert Smith. He's the pastor of New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. And he's also the chairman of the Foreign Mission Board of the National Baptist Convention, USA. His brief remarks are entitled, Physician, Heal Thyself, Saving a Nation in Crisis Through Love.
I'm Robert Smith, Jr. I'm the chair of the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated Foreign Mission Board. You have to allow every day to be a new day. In the book of Isaiah, it says that God makes all things new. And of course, in the New Testament, it talks about a spring of living water that's in your belly. And as a country boy, I know what a spring is. We had a spring in Wilcox County, and the beauty of it was that when everything else froze, a spring won't freeze. The ice can pile up higher and higher, but it keeps coming. I have been to some very low points during this pandemic. Earlier, you heard me say that I've had 57 funerals. That can get so bad to when the phone rings, you don't want to answer because you know it's going to be a thing about somebody else is gone. And today, I've just been trying to struggle through the fact that India, one of the poorest places with the poorest people, is suffering the most new virus attacks now. And that's just hard to think of. How could God be all benevolent and all powerful and yet send people to hell? You know, sometimes you raise that question, if God is all loving, we're his children, and he's all powerful, so why does he let a 3-year-old walk in the street, get hit by an automobile and killed while his mother's on the porch smoking weed and drinking wine. And didn't even notice the child. And God could have stopped it at any time. So if you don't refresh every day, if you don't refresh every day, if you don't refresh every day, you cannot continue in the Christian faith or the Jewish faith. Now, I was all but Muslim under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But I loved the teachings because they were the only people dealing with guys in prison. They would go to the prison, parole a guy, move him out of the community that sent him to jail in the first place. If you send a guy back to the same place that sent him to jail, he's going back to jail. He's got the same friends doing the same thing. Nothing has happened, but he's missed 3 years. On top of that, they created jobs so you could be independent. You could sell bean pies, you could sell fruit, you could sell newspapers, you could sell clothing. They had their own shops and stuff. I was very, very, very much impressed. Haiti has been sanctioned, blockaded, isolated for almost 200 years, my God. The only reason Haiti has suffered like it has is because no man is an island and no half of an island can stand. Everything has been done against them to put them to where they are now. So to isolate and declare sanctions against Syria, Yemen, anybody, is to starve them to death. It is to seek to destroy them. And it may be a part of the grand scheme of things. Ted Turner said some years ago that the world population needs to be reduced to 250 million so we can have enough oxygen for everybody. And who knows what kind of schemes are going on to get that reduction and to reduce the population of India, reduce the populations in South America, and even here in the urban United States. I do know this. There is a God, no matter what you call him, no matter how you approach him, whether as a Hindu or a Muslim or a Christian, God has a time limit set. And when that time comes, God will move and save his people, because God is always on the side of the poor.
Thank you, Pastor Smith. Final spokesman for today is Antonio Sanchez, speaking from Venezuela and Chile, but he's from the International LaRouche Youth Movement, and his topic is They Knew or Should Have Known, the cases of Venezuela and Chile.
And if we are going to sanction PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, which affects its very limited capacity to do oil business, it will have an impact on the entire people, the ordinary citizen of the communities of Venezuela. But the counter-argument at this moment is that they already suffer so much from lack of food, lack of security, lack of medicine, lack of public health, that at this moment, perhaps the best resolution would be to accelerate the collapse, even if it produces a period of greater suffering for a period of months or perhaps years.
Buenos días o buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Antonio Sanchez.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Antonio Sanchez. I'm a member of the Schiller Institute. I'm Venezuelan and I live in Chile. The words that I just read to you are a statement made by the former United States Ambassador to Venezuela, William Brownfield, to Voice of America on October 12, 2018. Venezuela is a country that, until recently, was an economy that was 95% dependent. 95% of its income came from oil exports. The Venezuelan economy has been sanctioned. PDVSA, the state oil company, has been prevented from accessing financial markets in dollars. The sale of oil in dollars has been prevented, and Venezuela's assets have been frozen, both those of PDVSA and the assets of the central bank abroad. This has been carried out primarily by the United States government, but also by the governments of other countries, such as the United Kingdom, Portugal, Canada, and others.
Quiero mostrarles brevemente cómo esto ha impactado en la economía venezolana.
I want to briefly show you how this has impacted the Venezuelan economy. This graph shows the number of minimum wages needed to cover the basic food items for a family made up of 3 children and 2 adults. In January 2017, approximately 5 minimum wages were needed to cover that market basket. 4 years later, in March 2021, you can see that about 120 minimum wages were needed. The main reason for this is that the government has had to carry out successive forced devaluations of the currency. In December 2019, $1 was worth approximately 55,000 bolivars. Less than a year and a half later, in May 2021, the dollar was worth approximately 2.8 million bolivars for every dollar.
La situación de Venezuela ha sido estudiada por expertos en derechos humanos.
The situation in Venezuela has been studied by human rights experts, by UN special rapporteurs and others, and they have requested the lifting of the sanctions that the United States, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Canada, and other countries have imposed on the Venezuelan economy. The World Food Program carried out a study of the food situation in Venezuela in 2019. They determined that 32% of the population suffered from food insecurity. That is, they needed help to be able to feed themselves. And of these people, 2.3 million were in a category described as severe food insecurity. The good news is that the World Food Program signed an agreement with the Venezuelan state, and on May 1st, the president of the World Food Program, David Beasley, announced that this agreement was already operational and that it aims to deliver food to 185,000 school children by the end of this year and increase to reach 1.5 million students by the end of the 2022-2023 school year.
Beasley también viajó a Guatemala y a Honduras.
Beasley also traveled to Guatemala and Honduras. He reported that in those countries there are approximately 8 million people who are facing famine. That is, the famine has quadrupled in the last 2 years. In fact, a survey carried out by the World Food Program found that approximately 15% of those surveyed have plans to emigrate in 2021. That is, approximately 6 million people have plans to emigrate due to the food insecurity situation they are experiencing.
Otra situación que también de las que le quiero llamar la atención es la de Chile.
Another situation that I want to draw your attention to is that of Chile. Chile is a country that has always been presented to us as the development model for our countries. However, the reality that I have been able to see personally has been totally different. In October 2019, a process of citizen protests began in Chile that demanded, among other things, better access to university education, better access to public health, better wages, and fair retirement pensions. I was checking the website of the National Institute of Statistics of Chile, and I found that in the third quarter of 2019, that is, immediately before the protests began, if we add the official unemployment rate in Chile, plus the percentage of people who have involuntary temporary jobs, that is, they don't work full-time, plus the percentage of people who work in the informal sector, it turns out that 45.7% of the labor force in that period did not have a secure job, a stable job, and a productive job.
Con respecto a la pandemia, con respecto al tratamiento de la pandemia en Chile.
Regarding the handling of the pandemic in Chile, I want to draw your attention to the healthcare situation. While it is true that Chile is one of the countries that has most quickly carried out vaccination, it is also true that out of a population of approximately 19.6 million people, Chile only has 4,538 ICU beds for COVID patients. And as of May 2nd, 2021, only 252 of those beds were available. In other words, despite the advances in the vaccination campaign in Chile, there is a 94.4% occupancy rate of ICU beds. Chile has had more than 1.2 million cases of COVID and has had 26,561 deaths as of May 2nd, 2021. I wanted to give you an overview of how sanctions affect countries like Venezuela and others that may also be sanctioned, and also show you how decades of applying neoliberal economic policies impacts our Latin American countries. But to solve this, just as the situation is serious, it also requires higher-level measures, higher-level programs, and extensive cooperation in order to establish suitable health systems in each nation with the necessary infrastructure of energy, electricity, water, to make these health systems sustainable. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope I have managed to show you the panorama and the serious situation that we are experiencing in Latin America. Thank you.
And thank you. We are now going to go to our question and answer section, and we'll bring our entire panel up, or rather those who are with us at the moment, in just a minute. But before we do that, we have another statement for our conference, and this comes from former United States Senator Mike Gravel. Mike Gravel was senator from Alaska from 1969 to 1981, and he became nationally known at the time for his attempts to end the draft. They were unsuccessful, but he was very forceful about it, and for putting the Pentagon Papers into public record back in 1971. which was a courageous action at the time. And he has this to say to us today. Since Vietnam, America has been engaged in many endless wars. These wars have cost many American lives and much treasure much better spent on economic development, food and health, here and abroad, as in Syria. To continue these endless wars means more military lives lost and more civilian deaths from sickness and starvation. America must intervene with economic development that will improve the lives of those in other nations. We must end the endless wars now. Signed, Mike Revelle, United States Senator from Alaska, former United States presidential candidate. I believe that was in 2008 and 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So at this point, we'd like to invite that we bring all the entire panel up. And we want to say that if you have questions, they will go to questions@schillerinstitute.org. And we'll begin our discussion momentarily once we have everybody assembled. Let's see. We have Dr. Elders. Good afternoon. We have Ms.Genita Finley, I see, but she's not up on the thing. We can't see her. Hopefully what will happen. Dr. Faggett, we see you. Hi, how are you? Okay. And we've got, let's see, Dr. Lang is on with us as well. I'm glad to say that General Peter Clegg is with us, who's one of the founders of our committee. Oh, there you are. Very good. Glad to see that your audio is there as well. All right. Luis Vasquez is with us as well. I don't see one or two of our people, but Antonio Sanchez is also here. And of course, there's Mrs. LaRouche. So Helga, maybe I'll go to you first just to see if you have any remarks about what you've heard. And then I'll ask different of the people who are present here, whether there are a few things or responses that you have or impressions from what you've heard this afternoon.
Well, I think what was very good to hear is that, our pilot projects sort of come into being and hopefully are an encouragement to expand the effort, because that is what we want to accomplish, that we actually set a model of what governments should be doing in this crisis. So I don't have many more comments other than to express that.
All right. Is anyone else who's presently there? General Clegg, of course, we didn't have a speech from you today. I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say to the group. You're the one person here that hasn't spoken of everybody that I see that's actually up on the screen. So if there's anything you'd like to say at this point, otherwise we'll just go ahead. I don't think I think you may be muted.
Now.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, yeah. All right, got to figure it out. This has been a very interesting set of sessions. I listened a little bit this morning as well as much of this afternoon. And the only thing that concerns me a little bit is everybody has all these criticisms of our policies of putting on sanctions and all this other stuff. But nobody, I didn't hear from anyone today, did I hear how we overcome the political questions, which are really the most significant thing preventing from all these good things from happening. And I don't certainly want to be seen as casting everything in military terms, but ultimately in places like Syria, it comes down to a military question. We as nice as it would be as if we could go in there with all sorts of assistance, we don't even have the ability to get anything in there. We have no influence whatsoever. We have pulled our troops out. If we want to, the only thing I could think of, if we want to really assist the Syrians, is that we'd have to go through the Russians, because they're the ones who have replaced us and now have the influence in that arena. And it's nice to say we should never impose sanctions anywhere, but then the number of tools, if you eliminate direct military intervention, nobody wants to go to war. The number of tools in your toolkit is substantially reduced. And I certainly sympathize with many of the arguments I heard this morning, particularly about the negatives involved with applying sanctions. And you know, sanctions are a blunt instrument. Although we sometimes try and finely tune them and exempt those measures which would most severely impact innocent civilians and the population and so forth. I'm sure many times sanctions, the measures we take are ineffective, don't help the way they should. But it's not clear to me that even if we remove the sanctions completely, it's going to help us in getting aid into any of these countries where the primary problem is political. I think I'll just leave it at that. And if anyone would like to pursue that further, they can question us all on that.
Do you have your hand up, Dr. Faggett? You're muted if you are trying to speak to us.
I really agree with General Clegg, but I'd like to hear General Clegg's comments too on the fact that we have now withdrawn from Afghanistan. And I think the previous panel really did not emphasize President Biden's position that he really wants more competition than conflict, and that it would seem that, and there was a conference by the Department of State this past week, which kind of seemed to imply that there is a new sense of collaboration and rebuilding of our coalitions. So I think there was some folks can listen to one speech and get different takeaways. But I was encouraged. I'm more encouraged too that if everybody looks at CNN on 8 o'clock Sunday, you hear Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. This is, I think, reflective of the fact that we are moving into a whole, we're going back 50 years now, and the sentiment now is against war. And I think General Clegg would agree, we do not have as many troops in the field. And as an old paratrooper, I'm sorry I missed the jump in Estonia, but that to me is just a real military exercise and should not be presented as some offensive action on our part. So I think if the general could really help us understand some of the reality and accuracy of some reports that we've been discussing. But I think overall, I'm personally feeling a lot more. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to say, go ahead and finish your statement.
Yeah. I'd just like to hear from General Clegg, though. Are we moving more away from?
Okay, that's what I want to know. No. Before that, I want to, because he asked the question about the panel and he talked about the entire conference. I want to give Helga the chance to respond to that, and then we'll yes.
Okay.
Well, maybe it's a question of when we talk about the new paradigm, we really think that the present loggerhead, I don't know if my English is right in this, if we cannot solve the problem between the United States and Russia and the United States and China, and move away from a policy where, it's either or, it's either the Russians are in Syria or it's the United States are in Syria. I mean, you have heard the story from Latin America. We did not speak so much about Africa, but, it's 54 countries who are dying, who are in an absolutely unbelievable situation. And the whole approach we have is that why can we not cooperate in, the world is so big. And the reason why I used at the end of my speech this, for time reasons, I used only a minute or so from the speech of this woman from the United Arab Emirates, Ms. Al-Amiri. And, she pointed to the sky and, she said, look at this little point around your finger, and you see billions and hundreds of billions of galaxies, not stars. And I find this always very useful, to speak about or think about the space aspect, because, I have this inspiration from people like Krafft-Ericke and Vernadsky. Krafft-Ericke in particular had this long view of history, the evolution of life out of the oceans with the help of photosynthesis, then higher species with higher metabolisms developed. Eventually, man appeared in this evolutionary process. Then, there was a conquering of more room to live, first starting with habitation on the oceans, the rivers, then through infrastructure, the inside of the landscape and the continents was opened up. And this process is still going on. And with the whole idea of the new Silk Road, or the Schiller program, the new Silk Road becomes the world land bridge. When we have this program to develop all continents through infrastructure and connect then the continents through bridges, tunnels, and that way we make the whole world habitable for all human beings. Now, that is not the end of it, because we are now getting back in a serious way in the age of space research and travel. There is the idea to put man back on the moon, and woman hopefully as well, to build a village on the moon as a staging ground for expeditions to Mars. And that will be only a stepping stone for interstellar space travel. And if you look at the sky in the way Ms. Almiri was pointing to, you realize that we are living in the universe, which is so incredibly gigantic. It blows my mind every time I'm thinking about 2 trillion galaxies. Have you ever tried to think about the galaxy in which we live? That is already a challenge. To think about one galaxy is mind-boggling. But 2 trillion galaxies, and that may not be even the end of it, because the Hubble telescope may not be the last stage in the development. And the reason why I said this morning, that if you think about what an incredible development mankind made in only 10,000 years, from the standpoint of the history of the universe, 10,000 years is like a second. And, we came from a hunters and gathering society, where the population potential was very limited, because if we would have stayed at that level, we would have been 5 million people maybe, because there were not more berries and rabbits. And if there would have been more people than berries and rabbits, we would have a population collapse. But man is a creative species, so we were able to invent, to domesticate animals, develop agriculture, increase the population potential by orders of magnitude. Then continuously we made discoveries, which increased the energy flux density in the production process, and thereby increasing the living standard, the longevity, increasing the number of people who can live on the planet. And now it's already clear we are looking for life on Mars. We found water. We had the first little helicopter fly on Mars, which is a remarkable breakthrough. We had a little plant growing on the moon, which is very important. If astronauts want to grow their food in space, you have to create conditions where plants can grow and helicopters can fly, despite the fact that you have no gravity or very little gravity on Mars. So these are all incredible accomplishments. In what time? 10,000 miserable little years. From the standpoint of the universe, this is nothing. So now let's think that we are the creative species, and we can always, there's, as Kennedy said, there is no limit to when human beings put their mind to it to find solutions. And, in a certain sense, once you start to think about mankind this way, and you start to think that there are so many areas where we could collaborate in a productive way, well, is it not time that we stop to think in terms of geopolitical confrontation, and that we really start to think, how we can collaborate for the common aims of mankind and make sure that we continuously exist? If we have nuclear war, then, that option is very probably extinct, and we will vanish. And there will be not even a historian to report about it, because they will vanish too. So all was for nothing. Beethoven composed his beautiful compositions for nothing. The founding fathers created the United States for nothing. Schiller wrote his dramas for nothing. And that thought is really upsetting. And I think we should look for ways of how to move mankind a gigantic step forward. And the way I look at it is, history was not linear. You had periods of tremendous cultural flourishing. The ancient Greece was such a period. The various renaissances, the Andalusian renaissances, the Italian renaissance. And then you had the Black Death, the Dark Age in the 14th century, which was a miserable period. You can read Boccaccio's Decameron, and you see that people went absolutely crazy because of the Black Death. But then, through a whole bunch of developments, we managed to get into the 15th century, the golden Italian Renaissance. And I always compare to our present situation the difference between the axiomatic thinking in the Dark Age in the 14th century and what changed in the way people were thinking in the 15th century. In the 14th century, you had scholasticism, you had witchcraft, you had the Inquisition, you had flagellants. People were just generally crazy. In the Golden Renaissance, you all of a sudden had a complete change of the image of man, the idea of science and technology improving the living conditions of mankind, and that it was the task of the governments to provide for the common good of the people. That was a revolutionary new idea, because up to that time you only had the oligarchs and the privileged classes who would have a good life, and the masses of the population would be backward. That started to change in the 15th century by increasing the number of people who would be literate, who would study and could contribute through their discoveries. So this was a complete change in paradigm. And it seems to me that we are now at a point in history. We are a global society, viruses, nuclear weapons, planes flying around the globe. We are one civilization, and we have now reached a point where, we are faced with a pandemic out of control, with a world famine, which is crazy to have a famine in the 21st century when it would be so easy to solve it. So it seems to me that we have to make, as a civilization, an evolutionary jump in our thinking, like between the 14th and 15th century, but this time, from a squabbling, different countries squabbling over limited resources on the planet, that we go to the next phase, thermonuclear fusion, which will undo the idea of limited resources, because it will create limitless energy, limitless raw materials. And if we cooperate in space travel, it will open up a whole new development of infrastructure in nearby space. So that is what motivates me, that, in a certain sense, that we make that evolutionary jump and find ways to cooperate. And it just happens to be that the place where we should start that is to build a modern health system in every country. And there, I'm absolutely certain that, if the United States would say to Putin or to Xi Jinping or to Assad, we want to send in the corps of engineers, how can we cooperate, with Chinese engineers, with Syrian engineers, and make that happen? And that's why I think this summit of the Permanent Five members of the UN Security Council should take place, and they should start to discuss such a change. And the whole world will be happy. Everybody, every country in the world will welcome that, and we will become adults as a human species. So that is how I look at this.
Okay, now let me say something since I'm moderating. This is the point of the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. If you ask a question, we will attempt to answer it. And we will ask various people to answer it in whatever way they think is appropriate. You are now embarked on that journey. And here we go. I'm going to ask a couple people here from the panel to respond to what both Helga just said, and perhaps they have a certain perspective. Now, I'm interested in getting perspective, particularly from South America in this case. Luis, I'd like to ask you, you're here. I think we've got your interpreter set up so we can deal with that. Do you have anything that you'd like to say about this? Can you, yes, you're up, but you're muted.
Okay. Bueno, añadir que esta coincidencia de opuestos es la solución en términos políticos para los países.
I'd like to add that this idea of the coincidence of opposites is the solution, the political solution for countries.
Y para el mundo en su conjunto.
And for the world as a whole.
El microcosmos y el macrocosmos funcionan indudablemente de manera complementaria en este aspecto.
There's no doubt that the microcosm and the macrocosm function in a complementary way in that regard.
Déjeme tomar brevemente el caso de Perú en este momento, para que ilustrar esto de que la única salida es la coincidencia de los opuestos para cualquier parte, para cualquier país, para el mundo en su conjunto.
Let me briefly take up the case of Peru as an example to illustrate why it is so that this approach of the coincidence of opposites is the only way to deal with any country in any part of the world.
Estamos en una situación donde en pocas semanas se decide el destino del presidente, hay nuevas elecciones.
In a few weeks, we're in a
de segunda
situation
vuelta.
we're going to be having the second round of elections for the presidency of the Republic.
Y han quedado como alternativas, por un lado, la izquierda, dirigida en este caso, esto es lo increíble, por los sucesores de Abimael Guzmán, Sendero Luminoso.
And what we have left are two people who are running in the elections. On the left, incredibly enough, you have followers of Abimael Guzmán, which were the Sendero Luminoso terrorists.
Y el otro oponente es la derecha, anticomunista, que todavía defiende el modelo neoliberal que obviamente ha destrozado la economía de este país, como la economía de todo el continente, ¿no?
And on the other side, you have the candidate of the anti-communist right wing who still defends neoliberal economic policies, which have destroyed the economy of this country, like the economies of the whole continent and the world.
Entonces, la discusión política que están dándole al pueblo es, ustedes quieren capitalismo o comunismo, ¿no?
So the alternatives which are being presented to people is, what's the political discussion? Well, what do you want? Capitalism or communism?
Y claro, cada uno exhibe los crímenes de Sendero, los crímenes de la izquierda, por un lado.
And of course, what you have that on each side, on the one hand, people present all of the crimes of Sendero Luminoso, of the left on the one hand.
Y por el otro lado, los opuestos, la izquierda opositora, exhibe el fracaso del del modelo económico, es decir, el fracaso de 40 años de neoliberalismo, donde se ha destruido toda la economía.
And on the other hand, you have the left wing, which present and pose all of the failures of 40 years of liberal economic policies, which have in fact destroyed the economy.
Ahora, esto, hay que decirlo, es el juego tradicional de izquierda a derecha.
It really has to be said that this is the traditional game of the left versus the right.
Con lo cual se ha manejado desde hace mucho tiempo a los países de Iberoamérica, ¿no?
Which has been used to manipulate from time immemorial the political situation in the countries of Iberoamerica.
Y seguramente en otras partes igual tienen dos alternativas, ambas erradas y erróneas, pero el pueblo no tiene más que escoger entre una y otra.
And I'm sure the same situation applies to many other countries as well. The population is presented with two options. Both of them are mistaken, both are wrong, and people are told to choose.
Y el problema es que la discusión no va al centro del problema, a realmente solucionar lo que supuestamente ambas facciones están, digamos, tratando de darle solución, ¿no?
And the problem here is that nobody actually talks about what's at the center of the issue, how to solve the problems that both sides supposedly are trying to resolve.
Es decir, ir a un programa, a una plataforma política que solucione realmente, ¿no?, el asunto de la pobreza, el asunto del atraso, los asuntos más inmediatos de la pandemia.
That is to say, you have to have a program that really actually solves the problem of poverty, the problem of backwardness, the most immediate problems of the pandemic.
Entonces la solución está en salirse de esa discusión estúpida, de esa caja cerrada, con dos alternativas falsas que se le ha metido a la población.
So the answer to this is you have to break out of the closed box with these two stupid responses, two false answers, which have been used to control the population.
No hay solución, por lo tanto, y las elecciones realmente en ese sentido no van a traer nada de optimismo.
So otherwise, if you look at Peru, there isn't a solution. These elections are not going to bring any kind of optimism to the population.
Esto es igual a lo que está pasando en el mundo, a mi entender.
This is the same thing that's happening everywhere in the world, as far as I can tell.
Porque la pugna que se está gestando cada vez más dramáticamente y peligrosamente.
Because the confrontation which is being created, which is growing, which is more dramatic and more dangerous day by day.
Por un lado, los Estados Unidos, y en eso hay mucho de culpa de todo este complejo militar industrial que quiere seguir ganando, pues, a costa de estas guerras eternas, ¿no?
On the one hand, you have the United States, and there is indeed a lot of fault to be found with especially that military-industrial complex that is wanted to keep waging and winning these perpetual wars.
Y por otro lado está la propuesta de la franja y la ruta de los chinos, apoyada por Rusia.
And on the other side, what you have is the Belt and Road proposal of the Chinese, backed by the Russians.
Y la solución es que ambas alternativas no es que se junten, sino que se logre un consenso, ¿no?, fuera de esta confrontación izquierda-derecha, capitalismo-comunismo, China versus Estados Unidos. La solución está en plantear alternativas y objetivos comunes globales que van a solucionar todo y que van a hacer actuar a la gente unidamente.
So the solution to this is that both sides have to reach a consensus. It's not a matter of left versus right. It is not capitalism versus communism. China and the United States and other countries have to join and to pose solutions and answers that actually solve problems which provide a way out for the current crisis in the world.
Bueno, eso es un poco un comentario, ¿no?
That's my comment.
Okay. Now, let me simply say that there are now, I wouldn't call it, it's a small explosion of questions. So that's good. And we've got, so we are going to begin to go to those unless someone else has a burning comment to make at the moment. If so, yes. If not, let's go to that. And we can return to this theme. Matter of fact, we are definitely going to return to this theme from just look at the questions that we're getting. And these are questions, sometimes they're directed to everyone, and sometimes they're directed to particular people on the panel. But actually, virtually everybody at this point is going to be brought into this. So I'm going to start off. This question this is for, okay, let me get to it. This is for Khadijah and Marcia. Marcia, I see you, and I don't know if Dr. Lang is on at the moment, but we'll take the question and maybe she is. Okay, great. So it says, this is from Kynan. He says, I want to thank everyone on the panel, especially people like Dr. Elders and Dr. Lang for their work with the committee in bringing food and medical support to Mozambique. I wanted to know what actions we can take to expand the committee's current membership and if it would be possible to get international support for the committee's activities from churches, charity organizations, and other government agencies, so we could raise awareness as to what can be done across the world. How are youth getting involved in the committee? I should add, I kind of is 19 years old. What can be done to recruit more youth who will act as community health workers and go to places like Africa and Ibero-America to help people and bring them water, food, and electricity? That's the question. So maybe we can start with you, Marcia, and then if Dr. Lang can respond, and then there may be others as well. So.
Okay, I hope you can hear me, Dennis.
Yes.
Very good. Well, first, thank you, Kynan, and it's completely open, just as what was described by Dr. Lang is we call it a pilot or a representative aid shipment to Mozambique. That is what it is, just an exemplary action. And it has continuity because of the very good work that the National Medical Association backed up. Not just there, I know they do things elsewhere too. So it is completely open. And in meetings since last June, occasional meetings since June when Dr. Elders and Helga Zepp-LaRouche initiated the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, there have been participants from Paris, from elsewhere in France, from South Africa, Philip Sikolabani. So especially this is not merely formally a question for youth. Youth are the future, and as Dr. Faggett described and Ms. Finley about the Mississippi Delta and about Ward 8 in Washington, here is a concrete project model, if you like, about public health. Now, with the pandemic, the question of people-to-people connections anywhere in Africa or anywhere in Mississippi or North Dakota or you name it are very restricted. We must be careful and respectful, but we do have the internet possibilities as long as there's electricity. And I'm not joking about that. That's part of our challenge in what we've all been talking about all day. But so I just would say, I'll be specific, get in touch with whoever it needs to participate. But also we're talking about spreading the word, aren't we? And I think that in the next few weeks, Dr. Lang can say more. We are hoping to literally assemble the concrete material, the antibiotics, the representative, it's called high protein density biscuits, they're called, just to represent, and cash for on-site purchase of food, and we're sending water purification tablets. We hope to have this done and publicizing not just this initiative, but publicizing the idea of we have to have the moral and economic and strategic response like this everywhere in the world. For example, in Syria, Russia has shipped in wheat. Russia has had, under the sanctions Russia has had, they've done a great job of increasing their wheat harvest and their agriculture productivity in the last few years. They're the leading wheat exporter in the world. And despite US unilateral sanctions on Syria, which were just renewed yesterday for a year, Russia shipped in wheat. That's, on one level, that's a gesture. We're making a gesture in Mozambique. We're encouraging people to make gestures everywhere in the world, and that adds up to a shift, the shift we can make. So I'll leave it at that if Dr. Lang wants to add.
Okay, well, what I would add to that, thank you very much for that, Marcia. That was a very good explanation and summation, really. I don't have much to add to that, but I will say this. In response to the caller's question, all of us here today can get on the calls, and all of us here today can reach out to our various colleagues, various groups that we are with, and let them know that this is going on. What our hopes and goals are with this mission is that we will be a model, a pilot program, so that people can see what can happen when people come together. People have a tendency to say the problem is so overwhelming that there's nothing we can do about it. But what we're showing here is, though we are not the United Nations or World Health Organization or the government of the United States or the government of Mozambique or any country governmental agency that may have very deep pockets with which to purchase supplies and try to address these problems, what we're trying to show here is that on a small scale, we are able to come together. And when we have a, I don't know what you call it, it's a tale in America where we talk about something called Stone Soup. And in Stone Soup, there's a story about a man who comes along. He's a vagrant, I guess you would call him, someone walking along without any food, no house to stay in. He comes to a village and he's hungry, and he asks everyone in the village for food. Everybody says, we don't have any food. Sorry, we can't help you. And so he goes and he gets up, he carries a pot with him. So he gets a pot and he picks up a stone and he wipes off the stone, and then he puts it in the pot and asks if anyone could maybe loan him a little water. And they're looking at him strange and say, what are you doing? And he builds a fire. He says, I'm making stone soup. And then he sits there boiling the stone in the water.
We lost our internet. She comes right at the punchline. We got to get the punchline now. You guys need
Here she comes.
Here she comes.
We lost your internet for a minute. No, you got to the point of the man was boiling the soup. So we're waiting. What's
Okay, the man was boiling. We all know the rock has no value that we can expect to get. I think I froze again. Am I frozen?
No, we can hear you.
Am I frozen?
Okay. That's just your face. We can hear you. Oh. It's not going to get this started.
Hey, Dennis.
While we're getting her back, well, before you go, Doc, I was admonished by someone to make sure that I asked Genita Finley to answer that question, since it was a 19-year-old asking the question, and he was asking about young people getting involved. So I don't know if that's what
I defer to Nita.
Okay.
Okay,
but
sure.
I just say all that to say we can all ask our friends, the religious and spiritual organizations that we're a part of, our employee situations, our employers or employees, whatever your situation is, our teachers if you're in school, our fellow students, our neighbors, to contribute, and everything adds up, because the thing that we have to realize is that when you're purchasing, as we're going to do, we're going to take the funds and purchase food there in Mozambique for distribution. Number one, that means we're decreasing our carbon footprint because we're not going to have to pay to have gas and things expended to ship something all the way across the ocean. Number two, that means that we're going to get it for a much lower price than what it would cost us to purchase the same food in America. And number three, we're going to help the economy in a country where the majority of the people have been devastated. They need that income. So if you buy, as an example, I think less than $20 will cover, and I'm probably wrong about this, but less than $20 will provide clean water for a family of 4 for approximately a month, if I remember my calculations when I was putting this together. So that means somebody that's having a Starbucks coffee every day before they go to work, if they forego their Starbucks for less than a week, they would be able to provide a family of clean water for a month. And so because your purchases, your purchase value goes so much further when you purchase there on the continent, everybody pitching in, a student saying, I'll take my $5 of allowance, or I'll take my bus money and walk 1 or 2 days instead of taking the bus all the way.
Yeah, good.
Okay, good. So, Genita, you probably should try, I think, at this point, to get into the space.
Okay, sure. I wasn't sure if she was frozen or not, if she was still speaking. I'll give an example of a project that I once organized a few years ago for breast cancer awareness, which is a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but we raised funds and it was student-led, and it was something that we actually did organize back home in the Mississippi Delta. And this is something that, from my experience as a student, this is something that you can definitely do, and you'll also get other students engaged in it and want to participate, which also is more than just, hey, just raising awareness, but it's actually contributing financially. And what it was a community basketball competition. And of course you can do this with any sport that you'd want to do. And we asked and we had a free throw contest, a 3-on-3 contest, a 1-on-1 contest, and a dunking contest. And we asked every person that participated to pay $5 to participate. And the person that would win would obviously win bragging rights, as well as a trophy that was able to be given out to each category of winning. And so this is all student-led with lots of high school students in different chairs and college students as well in different chair positions as well. And what happened was at the end of this project, I think we raised close to $6,000 as well as money from the concession stands from the different events. And it was organized through the churches in the Mississippi Delta. Something people may not know is Mississippi Delta is extremely religious. So we used different churches that had family life centers that had basketball goals in them. So we did different contests at each church. And then on that culmination contest, we brought it to one large church, which was the largest. But each time they participated, people had to pay. And, you know, everyone wants to be able to win and have bragging rights. And we had a scale. And at the end of that, we took the money and we were able to donate it to the organization. And it's something that I think we all felt great about, the winners, the participants, the other students that were involved. And it was also an activity, a physical activity that brings family out to watch and participate, and also just health reasons, right? Brings you out to get healthy, and that way promotes healthy living from that perspective. So I'm always on board. If you wanna get involved, there are ways to get involved. The best thing to do is pick something that you're naturally drawn to. If it's sport, for me, it's always been sports. Like, I'm really into sports. If it's not sports for you, another event that we once did was a community health fair where we asked all the actual physicians to contribute supplies and things of that nature. And we asked all the people that came in, they got in for free. But again, it was organized around the churches, and we asked each church auxiliary board and committee to donate $50 to it. And that's how we were able to raise money and awareness for that event. So yeah, my suggestion would be find something you're interested, find an organization within your city that often participates in activities that are helping other communities. And for me, it's always been churches, and it's really big in my community. So that's why I always like to center things around there, because they tend to be the focal point of the Mississippi Delta of different cities. I hope that helped give you some guidance as a young person.
And hey, Dennis, can I just add?
Sure, go ahead.
Anita's talked about wouldn't it be good if we had a competition between Russia, China, and the US? Who can do the most for India? So rather than have conflict fighting over it, let's work together. I think that would really do what Helga and Dr. Els are talking about. But I do think we need to remember that there is going to be a need for security. This might be another area where the military could assist in providing security for some of these efforts. I just want to add that to it. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, there's actually a question that came in, which is directed to Dr. Elders and also to General Clegg. Interesting question. And I think Helga also will want to say something about this. Here's what the question says. On expanding the health extension service idea, this is from Harrison Elfrink. And he says, the presentation about the health occupational training to disadvantaged youth of the Mississippi Delta region of the United States to train them to become health workers spurred an idea. My question is, could something like this be applied to other occupational areas like aerospace, engineering, physical and the life sciences, education to create teachers, skilled trades, advanced forms of agriculture, and other skilled occupations, or other geographical locations, especially in Africa, Iberoamerica, and so on. So, and what would the logistics and the strategic organizing for such a program entail? So he's got really two parts. It's just, can you apply the kind of thing that was being discussed by Genita and by Dr. Faggett concerning the Mississippi Delta? Can you apply that to these other fields? And what are the logistics? So Dr. Elders?
Yeah, well, I think the simple answer is yes. I think it could be applied to almost any profession. But you have to make it go. And of all the things we've talked about today, is you've got to have a leader, somebody who's going to get out and in front and lead it. You know, I may be committed, but I've got to be able to be competent to be able to provide leadership, get the community involved, and it can be applied to anything. We can apply it to teachers, to physicians, to community health workers, whatever. But somebody has to provide. You have to provide somebody to provide the leadership, and we've got to make it apply like public health. You know, that's what we need so much. You know, we obviously in COVID, you know, when it gets to be where they need intensive care, ventilators, we're talking about a different level. But where we really need the leadership was about back in the beginning, to get people to go out and make sure that people get immunized, get other people immunized, we get churches involved, schools involved, businesses involved, everybody is involved. What we've got to do is try and stop the pandemic. And the short answer is we've all got to be involved, and everybody has something to offer. Some of it is bigger and maybe more impactful than others, but everybody has something to contribute. And we need to make sure that we contribute what we have to contribute. And we've talked about getting China, Russia, and the United States involved with other countries to do what they need to do to make a difference for India. Well, I think there's no question that there's all three countries can do on many fronts, not just in regard to India, but they need to, if they can come together and begin to work together on solutions to problems, real problems, and, you know, rather than a lot of the, you know, just power issues. I think we could get an awful lot done. And I just really think Helga gave us just some wonderful history lessons this morning to go back and really review our history, find out what's going on involved. And was talking about the coincidence of opposites, about how people on the opposite ends of the spectrum of the world could begin to work, come together, think together, and trying to think of solutions and answers rather than thinking of how for them to become more powerful will make a difference. And I think in every country, community, if we could start getting our young people to start thinking about what can we do to make the world a better place, to become more united, I think we'll make far more progress than we've been making. And I think what we've just heard is that the whole world, all countries, we're all involved, and we all have something to contribute. And we need to start thinking about how can we make the world a better place, rather than how can we promote our own power, that we could probably get to where we need to go an awful lot quicker.
Okay, General Clegg. I think specific. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I wasn't looking. Sorry.
Okay. Just briefly,
Yes.
I have to agree with Dr. Elders. The answer is yes. But I think there's a hierarchy of needs, so to speak, and those needs which are most urgent are where the effort should go. And we've heard all day food and clean water. It's hard to think of things that are more important than those things, because without those, all your other efforts are probably going to have not too much effect. So I would second everything she said.
Okay. All right. Very good. Sorry, people are sending me messages. I'm trying to make sure that we follow this. Helga, do you have anything you'd like to say in response to that question?
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Elders. You know, she actually quoted Schiller. Schiller, at the end of his writing about the universal history, he said, something you all have to contribute, you know, and that is how you make your mortal life, you connect it to the endless chain of generations, and that way you gain your own immortality. If you act, you know, everybody can do. And I think that's the spirit we have to evoke.
Okay. All right. Very good. Anybody? Yes.
I just want to I just want to add to the question that was asked, can you do this in other fields? Absolutely, yes. And I wanted to give an example of another field that's doing it, which is media broadcast journalism. And this is something that you might, if you're interested in implementing in other fields, they have ways that you can implement in other fields, but just to shine a light on it. PBS Student Reporting Labs, they have a special program where they go into middle schools and high schools and they teach children and young kids how to become broadcast journalism, while they create their own student reports, and they actually air on national television channels and also within your state channels. And one of their main goals is to help improve media literacy, because a big problem they see is that a lot of people don't understand the different types of media, don't know the difference between news, entertainment, journalism. And they also want to help expose young kids to broadcast journalism for an early age, especially minorities, to get more of those voices included in broadcast journalism. So more voices and more opinions and more collective reasoning and things of that nature can come from that. So if you're interested in applying it to other fields, for me in particular, I actually looked into that program because I recognized it was a program that worked and it was effective and has been around for a while. So yeah, it's called PBS Student Reporting Labs, and it's specifically for broadcast journalism and things of that nature.
Well, we have a question which sort of touches on that, which is directed to Helga. And we're actually two questions. I'm going to combine them at this point. So the question was, you said Helga, you said in your Syria Times interview that you created the Schiller Institute on Schiller's conception of man and spoke of the dialogue of civilizations based on the best aspects of cultures. Given the dark days in the transatlantic world, which aspects of American and European culture should we seek to revive now and emphasize? Do you think that people will respond to this approach? Could you say more about Schiller's view of mankind? And then there's a second but related question. It says, this is from Leo, that's the name. I think you are based in education. So if we were to create schools at the primary, secondary, and universal level, in a digital mode via the internet, would we have more success because we can promote cultural interests for a new world? Okay, so that was the question. All right, so there's two separate questions, and I guess we can start with you, Helga, and there may be comments from others, I think, on those questions.
Well, I mean, from the United States, obviously, Benjamin Franklin comes to mind, who was, a universally humanist, universally educated person. He is a typical example for the dialogue of culture because he studied Confucius among many other things, and he was so impressed by Confucius that he applied the Confucian moral theory in his own system. Then naturally everything which went into the creation of the United States, the whole idea of the founding fathers, the idea of sovereignty, the rejection of imperialism, the founding of the first sovereign republic, the whole idea of the American Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, the idea that the country must be forever devoted to the common good, not only for the present, but for future generations. I mean, that preamble of the Constitution sort of, is the umbrella which defines every other thing which is expressed there. Naturally, the Declaration of Independence. John Quincy Adams, on the Declaration of Independence, I should mention that, when the Schiller Institute was founded, I was looking for a charter, and I took the liberty to just change about 6 words from the Declaration of Independence, where it says American colony, I say all countries. So basically to make it fit for every single country. And I think that is really a very good idea we should promote today. But then also the American system of economy, the whole Hamiltonian banking credit system, the whole question of the idea of the republic, that you come back to it again and again, which is what the American historical struggle was. Every time the British tried to subvert it, there was a reassertion of it. So I think that these are ideas which are extremely important, and they are a contribution to universal history forever. Now, on the question, and naturally there are other things one can mention: Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, the whole idea of the Apollo program, the whole, when we had the requiem for the death of John F. Kennedy, we played several of his speeches, and that optimism which was expressed by Kennedy, I mean, that's so American, and that optimism has to be reinstalled. People have to think again like that. Now, concerning Europe, there are many things. There's, as I said, the Italian Renaissance. We have this year the Dante birthday of 700 years. Dante, who was the inventor of the Italian language, the whole idea of the Divine Commedia, that, you can educate people to arrive from hell to the divine goodness. I mean, there are many, many things. Verdi's music, the whole question of Verdi tuning, why you have to have the correct tuning in music. The many, many Renaissance paintings, Brunelleschi's architecture. In Germany, you would definitely include Nikolaus of Kues, who is a very important father of modern science, the inventor of the sovereign nation state. For the first time was expressed in the Concordantia Catholica. Naturally, Kepler, Leibniz, Lessing, Schiller, Gauss, Riemann. So you would go to those thinkers in every country, and I didn't mention now Spain and France and many others, but you would take from every country the qualitative contributions, what they made. So you take the best thinkers from all of history and you make them known again, because the problem is, who talks about Benjamin Franklin in the United States? Who talks about Leibniz? A little bit more, but not enough. Leibniz was very important for many countries. So the way you get the dialogue of cultures going is you take those people like Friedrich Schiller, who had a beautiful image of man because he thought that every human being had the potential to be a beautiful soul. Now that notion is very dear to my heart because it's what makes us human. And anyway, so that's a whole other discussion. So I think that a lot could be done with digital education. I mean, one can use the internet for useful things. I don't think it replaces quite the dialogue between the teacher and the pupils, but I think a lot more could be done for mass education. But you need certain preparatory steps so that children learn how to use the internet for good purposes and not for playing video games and similar things. But I think that we could make a revolution. We could very quickly, have a universal education for every child on this planet. And that would set off a wave of creativity. We would have so many people who would really make fundamental contributions to universal history. So the answer is yes.
All right. Anybody else have any comment on that? I will make one comment since I'm not allowed as a moderator to say other things, but Paul Lawrence Dunbar, Frederick Douglass, Harry Burley, Hall Johnson. These are other important Americans that I'm sure find their place in your discussion. Okay, we had a few hands up. All right, we'll go to Walt Feig, and then we go to Antonio. Go ahead.
I want to submit Abraham Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, in which he freed the slaves. I think that set the tone in terms of a value of the human spirit that Americans can share.
Antonio? Go ahead. We got a translator ready? Or are you speaking in English?
No, en español. Spanish.
Okay.
I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias. Me parece que lo que dijo Helga es vital. Muchas veces las personas no nos damos cuenta de que actuamos de acuerdo a las ideas y axiomas que tenemos.
Thank you very much. I think what Helga said is really of vital importance because often we don't realize that the way we act is based on the ideas and the axioms which we have.
Y las diferentes situaciones de las que hemos hablado en esta conferencia, los peligros de guerra, la pandemia, los distintos problemas que enfrentamos son productos de que la situación, de que en las últimas décadas de alguna manera se han visto gobernadas por axiomas errados.
And the different situations we've discussed in this conference, the problem of war, the problem of pandemics, the problems of poverty, are all the result, in one way or another, that over the last number of decades we've been governed by false axioms.
Entonces, a la pregunta que hicieron anteriormente de si es posible o no establecer un nuevo paradigma, yo respondería que no solo es posible, sino que es necesario.
As for the question that was asked a little while back about is it possible to establish a new paradigm, I would say that it is not only possible, but it's necessary.
Es necesario retomar estas herencias de cultura clásica y que cada persona, como dijo Putin en un discurso, me parece que fue en diciembre del año pasado, todo debe empezar por una reflexión de cada persona del mundo.
And that we have to go back to our classical cultural heritage in each of our countries. And each of us has to do, as President Putin of Russia said, I think it was back in December of 2020, this has to begin with each of us reflecting on these ideas.
Debemos retomar el rumbo que hemos perdido como sociedad volver a los principios y verdades fundamentales del universo, acabar con las separaciones superficiales que se nos han impuesto a través de los medios.
We have to we have to find once again the path that we have lost as a society. We have to return to the idea of the fundamental principles of the universe and to put aside these superficial things that have been created to separate us.
Volver a colocar la santidad de la vida en el centro de nuestro esquema de valores.
And we have to place the issue of the sanctity of life at the center of our value system.
Y una vez que logremos este cambio de paradigma de pensamiento, vamos a poder empezar a resolver nuestros problemas gobernando nuestro proceso de pensamiento de esta forma.
And once we bring about this kind of change in paradigm and thinking, we will be able to solve our problems by having this approach govern the way we think and approach these problems.
Y eso era lo que quería comentar. Muchas gracias.
And that's what I wanted to add to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pose 3 questions, which will go to 3 separate people so that you can think about these and be prepared to answer. Also, as we do this, if there's any other thing that you want to say or ask or comment, just raise your hand so I can do that. So first, Helga, this one is for you. This is on applying the coincidence of opposites. Given your understanding of Cousé's coincidence of opposites, how would you assess the problem of reconciling China's policy of advancing the well-being of its people by exploiting its capitalist sector with the policy of the Atlantic states, transatlantic states, and other states ruled by the capital of advancing the power and vested interests of their capitalists by exploiting their working class sector? Okay, and it says, P.S. Thanks for having Dr. Joycelyn Elders on the panel. So again, that's for Helga. Given your understanding of Cousé's coincidence of opposites, how would you assess the problem, as I stated? Then this is just for Luis, because this was very, very somewhat specific, and I thought I better just ask it now so you can think about the answer. This is from a gentleman in Germany who was asking the question, when I saw the picture where people are waiting to fill their oxygen cylinders, I was initially surprised that the gas cylinders are green. According to international regulations, these are gas cylinders filled with argon. There should be white cylinders filled with medical oxygen. Is it a problem to get such cylinders in Peru? Why are these cylinders used? And on the other hand, people have to buy the cylinders. I can't imagine that. It should be possible to rent them. Why is that not possible? So that's for Luis Vasquez. So he has it. And then finally, Marcia, this is for you. And this one is from a farmer in South Dakota, well known to us. Do you have any ideas on what we can do to activate more U.S. farmers and farm organizations to join together in the fight? We need an organization of young, trained ag people to be sent to developing nations, especially in the continent of Africa. So that is the question for you. So Helga, we should do you first, then we'll go to Luis, and then to Marcia.
Dennis, can you just reformulate the second part of what he said?
Yeah, I can do that. Just give me a minute. Yeah, okay, here's what the idea of the question. I know what the idea of the question is, okay? It goes like this. China is advancing the well-being of its people, and the implication in the question says it's working people. So the working class of China is going to exploit the capitalist sector, right? That's the one part of the question. So if they're doing that, the people in the transatlantic states and other states are trying to advance their interests also, but except what they're doing is they're exploiting the working people of America to do that. And so since you have these two different approaches, how can you reconcile it?
Well, the funny thing is that the American system of economy and the Chinese system of economy are very, very identical. The problem is that, in the United States and also in Europe, people have moved away from Alexander Hamilton, national banking, from the American system versus the British system. I mean, if you think about the debate which was had by Carey, Friedrich List, and the whole discussion, the good government and the American system as it was developed by Hamilton and the Careys in particular, and as it was continued by Lynn, was the idea that you have to increase the productivity of your own working class through education, through healthcare, through increasing the living standard, because that's the only source of wealth. Now, then the British system was the idea, no, you have to control trade. You have to buy cheap and sell expensive and control the middleman. And that way you can, then you can add now the stock exchange and the speculation on future markets and all of that. And that is your source of wealth. Now, these are two relatively incompatible ideas. But if you look at this contrast from that standpoint, what are the Chinese doing? Well, I mean, okay, they opened up their markets a little bit. They did have a certain amount of speculation and so forth, but they have curbed that. They have now forbid even that Chinese people should speculate abroad. And they have now a policy more or less, with ups and downs, but by steadily increasing the excellence of their workforce, by betting on innovation being the only source of wealth in society. And it's not an accident that naturally they have Karl Marx, but they also have as the most known foreign economist Friedrich List, who is much more known and much more discussed in China than in Germany. So if you really look at it, the way to reconcile it is not to cause the Chinese to join the liberal model, which was the hope after China was allowed into the WTO. The actual reconciliation would be that the United States and Europe go back to their better periods. Like, for example, when Germany had the economic miracle in the post-war period, they applied the American system of economy. They had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Franklin D. Roosevelt's idea was the basis of the credit institution for reconstruction, which was the main engine for credits for the economic miracle. So the way to reconcile it is, and I said this earlier today, you have to go back to those economic systems which worked when the economy went well. And it was based on scientific and technological progress and the education of the creativity of every single person as the most and actually the only source of wealth. So I think the way to reconcile it is, that the casino economy should stop, and you have to go back to increase the productivity of your workforce, and then everything falls into place.
Okay, Luis, is you with us? There you are. Yeah.
Okay, ¿me escuchas?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sí.
Esto del oxígeno bueno, si no hubiera muertos, sería risible, ¿no?
This whole question of the oxygen, if there weren't dead people as a result of this, it would be laughable.
Porque el Perú es un país minero y las empresas mineras producen oxígeno, un oxígeno que le llaman industrial, por grandes cantidades.
Because Peru is a mining country, and one of the things that's produced is oxygen, what's called industrial oxygen, and it does so in large quantities.
Hay un asunto de envase que tiene que ver con el envase y con el nivel de concentración de oxígeno puro para que sea oxígeno medicinal. Y es un proceso relativamente sencillo.
There's an issue of the cylinders, the packaging of this, and also the concentration of the gas, of the oxygen, so that it can reach a medical level, and it's a relatively simple industrial process.
Pero no existía ese proceso, no se había implementado y el gobierno no lo promovía. Tardíamente lo ha comenzado a resolver.
But it didn't happen. It didn't get done. The government didn't carry this out, and only very late in the game did it begin to address the problem to solve it.
Y la foto corresponde en el momento en que el mercado, el libre mercado, el comprar barato y vender caro, ¿no? De ganancia sin ningún sentido de moral ni ético, etcétera, está en juego. Y ahí,
this photograph is a picture of the free market at play. The model precisely of buying cheap and selling dear, the whole idea that the only thing that is really profitable is money without any moral or ethical sense whatsoever.
Y ahí los precios de los balones y el precio de oxígeno para relleno se dispararon simplemente por las leyes del mercado.
And what happened is that the price of the new cylinders and of refilling those cylinders shot up. Why? Because of the laws of the market.
Claro, algunos alquilaban, pero la mayoría quería ganar más, y hablo de algunos empresarios, comerciantes, ¿no? Querían ganar más y te vendían el balón.
Oh, sure, there were some people who did rent these things out, but there were businessmen who preferred to make a greater profit, and so what they would do is they would sell them. A few would rent, but only not.
Con respecto a la pintura, no sé, debe haberse acabado la pintura blanca, pero todas las pintaron de verde, ¿no? Eso.
As for the color and the paint on it, I don't know. Surely they ran out of white paint or something like that. I'm not knowledgeable on the color of these things.
Pero déjeme esto simplemente añadir algo que me parece muy importante con respecto no solamente a este aspecto del oxígeno.
But let me point something out that just briefly I wanted to add something, not only with regard to this question of oxygen,
sino de todo el sistema que se necesita en este caso del COVID, mecanismos, equipo, etcétera, incluso médicos.
But with regard to the entire system, the whole system that's needed to deal with something like COVID, we're talking about equipment, but also trained medical personnel.
Que indudablemente ha agarrado a muchos países del mundo, a los países pobres fundamentalmente, sin preparación.
Which is something that has caught a lot of the countries in the world, but especially the poor countries, have caught us completely unprepared.
Y ahí viene precisamente el asunto de la cooperación internacional, que tampoco ha existido.
And this is where the whole issue comes in of international cooperation, which also has not existed.
Lo que están haciendo con las vacunas, por ejemplo, es criminal. Hay países como Perú que no se está vacunando a la gente porque se han traído algunos miles simplemente de vacunas.
And then there's the question of the vaccines. What's happening with the vaccines is just flat out criminal, because, you know, there are countries like Peru where there are just no vaccines. No one is being vaccinated. There's been a couple of hundred, perhaps, in the country.
El llamado de Putin, el llamado de Xi Jinping, y felizmente Biden también está de acuerdo. Las vacunas tienen que ser algo internacional, un bien público. y gratuito internacional.
And what Putin has said, Putin's called, Xi Jinping called, and thankfully Biden has come around and agrees on this thing. The question of vaccines is an international matter. It must be a public good and it must be free.
No ganarán algunas corporaciones farmacéuticas, pero va a ganar todo el mundo.
Maybe big pharma companies won't be get the greatest profits, but the world as a whole will win.
Y efectivamente va a ganar todo el mundo, porque fíjense, hay que, sobre todo para los Estados Unidos.
Because look, the whole world will win. Look, this is important to understand, especially for the United States.
Ustedes han tenido a un gran poeta, un gran literato, Alan Poe.
You've had a great literary figure and poet, Edgar Allan Poe,
que escribió un relato corto sobre la peste.
Who wrote a short story about the plague.
Pero cuyas lecciones son aplicables totalmente en la actualidad.
But the lesson of that is applicable completely in the current situation.
Poe, digamos, en la línea de los grandes humanistas, los grandes artistas como Boccaccio, escribió un relato que se llama La Máscara de la Muerte Roja.
Edgar Allan Poe, in the tradition of those great humanists such as Boccaccio and others, he wrote something called The Mask of the Red Death, which you may have heard of.
Y los jóvenes en Estados Unidos deben, en la secundaria, etcétera, deben comenzar a leer eso obligatoriamente, porque relata el caso muy aplicable en la actualidad para aquellos que creen que aislándose del mundo.
This is something that ought to be obligatory reading for students in high school and junior high, because this is a totally applicable case to today. It tells the story of those people who believe that by isolating themselves,
se libran de las pestes que pues está ahí afuera, en los lugares pobres, en los países apestosos, etc.
Because somehow they would be free themselves, save themselves from the plague, which is outside, which is out there in the poor countries, the pestilent countries.
Pues ahí cuenta de que el príncipe hace un castillo a prueba de peste, a prueba de COVID, digamos.
Poe there tells the story about a prince who builds a castle which is completely defended against the plague, or let's say totally defended against COVID.
Invita solamente a su aristocracia, a sus amigos, para festejar esa situación, de que se han librado de la peste.
And he invites over his friends, the aristocracy, only them, to celebrate the fact that they have freed themselves from the danger of the plague.
Claro, como Poe lo describe, se tenía que ir enmascarado, ¿no? Con disfraces a esa fiesta, a esa fiesta.
And the way Poe describes this was a masked ball. You had to wear a disguise.
Y para hacerla corta, el asunto es que entran enmascarados y cuando se sacan la máscara, ocurre que había uno que tenía una máscara roja, un personaje que tenía una máscara roja, y al sacarse la máscara se dan cuenta que es la muerte y todos comienzan a morir.
And just to cut to the chase on the story, everyone was there wearing their mask, and as they took them off, one person had a red mask on, and when he took it off, he was death, and everyone began to die.
Entonces, fíjense, esto aplicado en el momento actual es lo mismo de lo que decía cuando en la presentación. Los Estados Unidos no pueden valerse por sí solos en contra de esta peste, ni Europa, ni los países avanzados.
And so this applies totally to the situation today, which was one of the points I was making.
El frente de pelea,
which was one of the points. Espérate, Lucho. which is one of the points that I was making in my remarks. The United States cannot get by alone. Europe cannot get by alone.
La primera línea de pelea de esta guerra global está acá, está en la India, está en América Latina, está en África. No sean tontos, si quieren sobrevivir a la peste, pues no les va a servir castillos, por más muros que hagan gruesos, etc. No van a poder detener este virus.
Okay, con eso ya. And so the first line of defense of this problem, of this global war, is here. It's here in Peru, it's in India, it's in Africa. People should not be foolish. If you want to survive, there is no castle that can be constructed that's thick enough, with walls thick enough, unless we fight this battle globally.
Okay. Y para terminar, les quiero poner un ejemplo histórico, bien curioso. Poco conocido, pero curioso.
And to finish off, I want to give you a brief historical example, which is little known, but it's quite curious.
Sobre el asunto del descubrimiento y la conquista española de lo que es ahora Iberoamérica, ¿no?
Which has to do with the Spanish conquest of the area, which is now Iberoamerica.
Todo el mundo sabe que Colón llegó a América, más al Caribe, ¿no?
Everyone knows that Columbus arrived in the Americas into the Caribbean.
A una isla que ahora es dominicana en 1492.
Arrived in an island which is today the Dominican Republic in 1492.
Encontró indios, tenía no me acuerdo el nombre ahorita de esa tribu, una etnia, que han desaparecido por las enfermedades que trajeron los españoles.
And he came in contact.
He's got to hurry up.
Adelante. Tenemos que terminar.
Ok. Ya, entonces lo dejo ahí, ¿o?
Should I leave it at that?
You probably should. You probably should. Write it up.
Probablemente sí, pero es.
No, we have to go. We have a limitation on our time, and we're going to now go to our summary remarks. In fact, Marcia is going to have to answer her question in her summary remarks, which everybody has to give, and then we're going to have Helga take us out. So, Marcia, you have your question, but we're now into the summary for the entire panel. Okay, go ahead, Marcia. You're muted.
Thank you. Okay.
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you for that question from South Dakota, and I bet it's for our friend and big activist in the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, Ron Wyzorek. And let's look at this in two phases, because he says, what about mobilizing youth in this effort? And I think that let's look at ourselves as already in that phase of wanting to engage, especially the next generation, in what we have to do. It's a question of spreading the word, not just to ag colleges, whether it's Tuskegee or Iowa State, but I mean individuals who, with or without a farm background, who want to engage. We are inhibited from engaging person by person to literally have exchanges back and forth between the Caribbean and the US or Europe or France and, or Africa and Argentina. But let's consider ourselves in the preparation and staging phase for that. And that I'll just say about that, the exciting thing is youth can bring an open mind to terrible opposites, which are being played off against each other in things like food as well as medicine and between nations, power politics as it's called. And I'll just give one example and quit because of the time. But for example, when our committee effort was contacting independent seed producers in the United States about high quality drought resistant seeds for Southern Africa, for Mozambique, because they've been experimenting on there for several years, it turns out that, of course, not only do the independents I'll take corn. That's what we're talking about. Not only do the seed producers, we know they have to pay a license fee to big pharma and big chemical and big food companies like Bayer Crop Science or Cargill. Monsanto is owned by Bayer. You pay a license to use their germplasm from corn or maize. But at the other end, if you produce a nice corn that grows well in Indiana or Illinois and would grow well in Zimbabwe or Mozambique, where we want it to be available, you can't. You have to have a license from Bayer Crop Science or from Monsanto. You cannot, our committee can't make that available without a license. So, but this is played off by people like Bill Gates and others to say, but if you provide good seeds in Zimbabwe or Mozambique to corn, you will hurt the local farmer who carry their seeds over from year to year. Well, of course, does it have to hurt them? No. We can have a coincidence of common interest by deciding on behalf of everyone together, from every nation and from every background, that we're not going to let the big transnationals own the right to life, the means to life, like germplasm in corn seeds, and we're not going to hurt any farmer who keeps them back. You get the idea. This appeals to a young mind, or a young mind like I'm sure Dr. Elders, or we have to stop this, and we can. And my only wrap up is I take heart, one thing, from the fact that there are gestures out there, I call them. We can make them not empty. Just yesterday morning, on May 7th, at a meeting connected to the UN Security Council, and it was brought together by China. You had Wang Yi from China, you had Sergei Lavrov from Russia, you had Tony Blinken, and they talked about multilateralism. But Lavrov said that President Putin does reiterate he wants a meeting between Russia and China and they call them the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. Well, we can make the content of this, we can set the agenda, and I think that all the different speakers and potential that was shown today can make all the difference.
Yeah, what we're going to have to do, because of the limitations of the time that we have, is go directly to Helga. We're not going to be able to take summaries from everybody. There are questions that are also for many other people here. We'll forward those questions, but we're going to go to Helga now to get a closing remark for this panel. And we want to, and I will of course give people information on how they can help. So Helga.
Well, I think we will see a dramatic worsening of the situation. I mentioned this already, that the head of the African CDC put out a warning saying that the outbreak of the new variant in India is a wake-up call for the entire African continent, because it can happen there anytime. And the main vaccine production for all of Africa came from India. So it will get more dramatic. And I think, a crisis can always be a chance to accomplish exactly the new paradigm in thinking. And the reason why I mentioned the fall of Constantinople from 1453 was, that was a moment where, because of the reports about the massacre, the tension and almost hatred between the Christians and the Muslims was at an all-time high. It was like a huge clash. But that is exactly when Nikolaus applied the coincidence of opposite thinking in writing this beautiful dialogue about the peace in religion, by bringing all the different representatives of the different religions and nations together, and then establishing step by step in a pedagogical way the higher level of thinking about the one God, the one truth, and the one religion as compared to the prophets and the traditions and so forth. So I think, because people will be freaked out, because this is a big existential crisis, I think also the perceptiveness will be bigger. So we should, really go with this commission committee work and really make it a dominant idea in all of history in this conjuncture.
Thank you. And I wanted to say to everybody that's asking, that many people are asking how they can help. The best thing to do is to contact us through Schiller Institute. You can, of course, send it right to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Lynn Speed and Marcia Baker and also Dr. Lang are the people that are doing the primary work of that type. You can certainly get in touch with them. We want to thank everybody for their interest. So at this point, we're going to conclude our conference for the day. And I will, as I say, forward questions to the various panelists that were asked by various people we were unable to get to today. It's good that we had that number of questions. So to Dr. Khadijah Lang, Dr. Walter Faggett, Louis Vasquez, Antonio Sanchez, Ms.Genita Finley, General Peter Clegg, Dr. Joycelyn Elders, Marcia Baker, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Thank you very much. And thank all of you for being with us today. And we hope you'll become involved in the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites and the method of averting a collapse of civilization, because we come by a new morality higher and high enough to allow civilization and mankind to survive. Thank you.